Game of Thrones, The Wrath of the Sleeping Dragon. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 801, Forging Dragon Spear. The princes and governors of the kingdoms and city-states on the continent of Essos gathered in King's Landing to discuss ways to save the world, divide the responsibilities and obligations that all kingdoms and city-states should bear, and unite to fight against the common enemy of all mankind. This was a meeting to save the nation. At the beginning, there was a quarrel because of the long-standing interests, but the wooden messenger took the lead, and then the emperor of the Valyrian Empire, the largest country in the human world, gave a speech that made everyone temporarily put aside their prejudices and interests and unite together. If someone else said such words, it might not be convincing, but Viserys could do it, and only he was qualified to say these words. Everyone came to King's Landing from afar, just to ask the Valyrian Empire to take on the responsibility of saving the fate of the human world, and send troops and dragons to fight against the White Walkers. Therefore, before setting off, everyone had already tacitly agreed that it would be the Empire that led all mankind to launch a war of resistance, and only the Empire could do this. Any other city-states in the East Continent, whether it is Bravos, the Dothraki, or the descendants of the ancient Gis Empire, such as Astapa, Junfei, and Meereen, etc., although they are all regional hegemons and have even longer histories, they are not able to bear such a heavy responsibility under this disaster. And Viserys' division of responsibilities and obligations is also very simple. That is, the powerful countries bear more responsibilities, and according to the proportion, the weak countries and city-states also have their own responsibilities. Not all of them rely on the powerful city-states and countries, while they are paddling on the side. This is a battle for the survival of all mankind. If you still had luck and selfishness at this time, it is naturally a way to die. Because of Daenerys' pregnancy, Viserys was not going to leave Westeros. He wanted to stay with Daenerys. In fact, he did not expect that the timing was so good that night in the cave. He shot with one shot, and the child that Daenerys was pregnant with should have been born that night. However, when Viserys received a letter from King's Landing, and was about to set off to return to King's Landing, Daenerys found Viserys with her slightly bulging belly and her other wife Rhaenys. Rhaenys and Daenerys did not want them to be a burden to Viserys, and told him that, if he was needed in the East Continent, he could go there without worrying about them. Rhaenys and Daenerys both had their own mounts, Rhaegal and Viserion, for protection, while their sister Aerion stayed in Highgarden, which was theoretically safer in the heart of the Empire, and Aerion brought her two children, Diana and Heroes, and there were two dragons beside her. Aerion, Rhaenys and Daenerys all had the ability to protect themselves, so there was no need to worry. Although their husbands could fly to the East Continent to save the world, they would also guard their homes for him and share the pressure on his shoulders. When Viserys heard the words of Rhaenys and Daenerys, he was moved, but also wavered in his previous thoughts. In the final analysis, saving the whole world is the responsibility he should shoulder. Love is a taboo for responsibility. Viserys also thought of the warning given to him by his great-uncle, Maester Aemon. The old man is the oldest person in the world today, but his body is still quite strong. After Viserys regained the Iron Throne, he invited Maester Aemon to stay in King's Landing, but the old man refused, and told him what he had just said. Maester Aemon was not talking about himself, but reminding Viserys that in the future, no matter when, love and responsibility conflict, the most correct measure should be made. Therefore, in the war, when the Night's Watch went north to retake the north, Maester Aemon insisted on leaving King's Landing and returning to the wall to finish his watch despite his advanced age of nearly 100 years old. After the responsibilities that each city-state needs to bear are completely divided, the next few days will be spent discussing the details of forming a coalition. The first is to send out troops, and each city-state will contribute according to its own division of responsibilities. For example, Astapa sent out 3,000 Unsullied and contributed a large amount of food. The grassland knights under Mengokal did not produce anything but lived on looting. There was not much food in the tribe and they could not take out a large amount of food. They also needed assistance from other countries and city-states, so they could only send out more troops to help. Bravos sent out an invincible fleet that could cross the entire trembling sea without any rivals. Volantis provided a powerful army to prevent the White Walkers from continuing to spread on the continent. At this time, the woodman of the kingdom of Ivavelin proposed that his people had mastered an ancient spell that could allow all plants to grow under the magical breeze and survive without sunlight. Although the efficiency of the woodman was not very high, it could also be regarded as a big surprise. At least everyone present was standing at the top of the pyramid of this world. Even if the resistance failed in the end, everyone would starve to death, but they would definitely be the last to starve to death. Under the cover of the long night, King's Landing was holding the Supreme Human Conference, and the heads of various countries discussed the specific matters of forming a coalition. Although it was extremely urgent now, this matter could not be sloppy. To win the war, soldiers on the battlefield must fight bravely, commanders must make correct judgments, and rear supply dispatch and other links are indispensable. Especially when facing such an enemy, it is even more necessary to be cautious. During the time when the Supreme Council of Humans was held, Viserys was not idle. He took out several Valyrian steel swords collected in the warehouse. These were all confiscated during the Conquest War. After the war, they were collected in the treasury as trophies. These Valyrian steel weapons are Ice of the Stark family, Broken Heart of the Tully family, and Alert of the Hightower family. Although this sword was claimed to be lost, it was still found when the Hightower family was raided. In addition to these swords, there are also some daggers, knives, rings and other small items. Viserys deliberately collected a lot of Valyrian steel items, and today they are finally useful. Viserys found the artisan minister Tob Mortho and asked him to recast all the Valyrian steel weapons into a new dragon spear. He would go to the East Continent with this spear to fight against the Night King. The great artisan Tob Mortho, who had forged swords for Viserys, accepted the order excitedly after hearing the Emperor's order. While the meeting was still being held, he had already recast these Valyrian steel weapons and was working on making the largest Valyrian steel weapon in current historical records. Chapter 802 Rebels. Ding, ding, ding. The foundry in King's Landing was in full swing. Tobho Mortho, the master craftsman who had forged swords for Viserys, took off his shirt, revealing his muscular body. Although he was old, he still kept a good figure because he often did physical labor. After Viserys lifted the ban and allowed the former Queen Cersei to leave the Red Castle, he wanted to marry her and have a child to join the ranks of the nobility. But unfortunately, Cersei is only 34 years old now. The years have not left too deep marks on her. Her appearance is still bright and beautiful, attracting the governor of the Iron Islands, Euron Greyjoy. For Cersei, Euron even ignored her past misdeeds and the love history that had been talked about for many years by the people of King's Landing, and still insisted on marrying her. Therefore, there was a better choice. Cersei naturally looked down on him, an old man who was born in the low class and got lucky, so she finally chose to marry Euron. At this moment, the master craftsman Tob Mortho led his disciples to forge the magic weapons, and the once famous magic weapons were sent to the furnace for recasting. These magic weapons were once symbols of royal power, such as the Ice of the Stark family. This giant sword is taller than Robb Stark, the sword is wider than the palm, and the blade forged with Valyrian steel is as dark as black smoke. This sword is too big to be suitable for fighting in battle. Eddard once wielded this sword to kill the White Walkers, but he would be exhausted after a while. King Robert, who was famous for his strength and bravery, also wielded this sword on the battlefield and killed the first White Walker in 8,000 years. However, now this sword has been sent to the furnace for recasting. The history and past contained in it, as well as the authority of the kings of the north of all generations, are all melted into a pool of molten iron in the furnace, and finally added to the new magic weapon, becoming the rebel god-killing spear. This was the name Viserys had given himself. When the master craftsman Tobho Mortho heard it, his body trembled slightly, and he was filled with endless fear. Limited by his vision, he didn't know why the emperor had given such a name to this dragon spear that had not yet been cast, but he didn't dare to object, so he could only do it. Outside the foundry, Viserys was standing on the second floor, quietly overlooking the bustling scene below, and there was a woman beside him. This woman was wearing a loose robe and a red lacquered wooden mask. She was the envoy of the Dothraki people. She called herself a shadow binder from a Shay named Quilly. She had taken the initiative to find Viserys alone for a secret talk after a meeting to discuss the details a few days ago. Quilly bluntly told Viserys that the current Khal of the Khals, the king of the Dothraki, Mengo Khal, was actually the Drogo Khal who was burned to death by him. Viserys was just a young boy who led his army for the first time. Drogo, who had just inherited his father's position and became a Khal from Karaka, was also young and inexperienced. However, Drogo was tall and had a full beard, which made him look older. The young and arrogant Drogo led his tribe to the west, preparing to plunder and harvest the newly grown Andal city of Andalus. In the crisis, Viserys led his army to personally fight against the Dothraki's plunder, so the two teenagers fought fiercely in the current eastern border of the Empire, the Fort of Hell, the former homeland of the Rhoynar, Goldohol. In the end, Drogo, who had not yet grown up, encountered Waterloo on the Western Territory. He underestimated the enemy and rushed forward, and was ambushed by Viserys, who burned him to death in a fire. After the war, Viserys found Drogo's body and buried him after confirming that he was dead. But he did not expect that 3 Shadowbinders from the east, including Blizzard, found Drogo's body and used necromancy to resurrect Drogo. Then, the Shadowbinders from the east, such as the Achilles, used shadow magic to control Drogo's body, gathered some remnants, returned to the Great Grass Sea, and changed their name to the same name as the first Khal who unified the Dothraki, called Mengo Khal. In the end, the holy city was stained with blood and the knights of the grassland died. Mengo Khal completely unified the Great Grass Sea after the crazy decisive battle of these Dothraki, and became the well-deserved king of kings among the Dothraki. And Viserys did not expect that this Mengo Khal, who had never heard of the name in the original trajectory, but suddenly rose in this era and swept across the Great Grass Sea to unify the Dothraki tribe, was actually Drogo who was burned to death by him. He was a little curious about who this person was at that time, but it's a pity that the person is gone, and now what is controlled by killers and others is just Drogo's body. Otherwise Viserys would like to chat with Drogo. Because the world has changed too much now, and the world he was familiar with has become unrecognizable under his influence. Drogo led his tribe westward and almost strangled the young Viserys in the cradle. That was the most critical moment in Viserys' life. Drogo was definitely one of Viserys' most admired opponents. Viserys had not grown up at that time, and Drogo was also beginning to show his age, but it was a pity that the two opponents who should have dominated the East continent staged a decisive battle in advance. However, the past is over, and the dead cannot be resurrected. The fear that once faced is now just a smile. Even if 100,000 Dothraki are now heading west, they are just ashes under the dragon flame. Viserys just sighed slightly. After openly stating his identity, the lizard explained his intention and purpose. She came to the western world and used necromancy to resurrect Drogo's body just to borrow and lead the Dothraki to save their hometown. Because the Shadowbinders in the east had predicted the breath of the end of the world a long time ago. But unfortunately, the Dothraki army encountered the Golden Kingdom in the east. The two major forces across the east and the west broke out into a fierce clash, and both sides were ultimately defeated. The Dothraki were beaten and bloodied, and fled back to the western world in a panic, but failed to successfully reach a share under the shadow. Now the whole world has fallen into a long night, which was beyond the expectations of Khaleesi and others, because she only predicted that a crisis that would destroy the world would brew in the east. She thought that the monsters in the Grey Wasteland would riot and destroy Shay, but she didn't expect that it would be the arrival of the Long Night, which was a disaster for the entire world. Chapter 803 Glass Candle. Valyrian steel is a kind of steel infused with magic. Valyrian craftsmen use repeated forging to balance and remove impurities in the steel, and then cast spells to give the steel extraordinary qualities. Looking at the scene of the busy work below, the robed and masked lizard standing next to Viserys spoke in a cold voice. This person's level is good, but unfortunately he can only recast Valyrian steel, and does not have the skills to turn ordinary steel into Valyrian steel. The best craftsmen in the world are in Koha. Now Koha is occupied by the Red God cult, and many craftsmen have escaped. Your Majesty might as well recruit some. Viserys heard the lizard's words and turned his head to look at her. He didn't expect that this woman even knew a little about Valyrian steel. However, the lizard seemed to see the meaning in Viserys' eyes and nodded. In Shire, there are no secrets. The lizard told Viserys that her hometown Ashay was a great city, larger than Volantis, Karth, King's Landing and Old Town combined. And the people of Ashay don't know who created it. There has always been a saying in the local area that Ashay has been standing here since the beginning of creation, and it will always exist here until the day the world is destroyed. This is a city immersed in magic, where many secrets that cannot be made public in the outside world can be discussed. If you have any doubts, you might as well come to Ashay in the future. You must know that sometimes, if you want to move forward, you must retreat, and if you want light, you must go through the shadows. Quelix saw that Viserys had doubts in his heart, so she suggested that Viserys could go to Ashay one day in the future to find the answer. If you say where is the place with the least secrets in the world, perhaps it is Ashay. Even the three dragons of Viserys, Rhaenys and Daenerys now, Balerion, Viserion and Regal, were bought by Illyrio from Ashay when they were dragon eggs. But at that time, dragons had disappeared from this world, and no one could hatch dragon eggs. Dragon eggs were just a beautiful stone, so the price Illyrio paid was not too high. Now that there are signs of dragons active in this world, a dragon egg is worth a lot of money, and there is still a shortage of stocks. Well, there is a chance. Viserys turned his head and looked at her after hearing the suggestion of the lizard, and then nodded slightly. However, at this time, Viserys looked at the mask on the woman's face and suddenly became curious about what the lizard looked like under the mask. Why do you always wear a mask? The lizard was slightly stunned when she heard it. She didn't expect Viserys to ask this question suddenly, but she hesitated for a moment and then spoke. It's too secret to show your face. Among the many people who are active in the mysticism in Ashay, the most evil are the Shadowbinders. They are used to covering their faces with painted masks. They dare to leave Ashay alone and move towards the Shadowland upstream of the Ash River. Viserys nodded and didn't ask more questions when he heard that this was the rule of the Shadowbinders. Although the lizard could not help Viserys forge Valyrian steel because she did not master this spell, she could teach Viserys another kind of magic. It is said that the wizards of the ancient freehold used glass candles to allow their vision to pass through mountains, oceans, and deserts. They can enter other people's dreams and show illusions or communicate with each other across half a world by sitting in front of such candles. The Valyrian freehold has left many mysteries in the world, and most of these are things that cannot be used by others except the Valyrian civilization. For example, the method of building black stone buildings, the indestructible dragon road, and the method of casting Valyrian steel. Weapons made of special materials such as Valyrian steel are lighter than conventional metals, but they are harder, almost indestructible, and extremely sharp. No armor or shield can stop the sharpness of Valyrian steel. In addition to Valyrian steel and black stone buildings, the same is true for dragons. They are only close to Valyrians with special bloodlines, and they ignore other humans. These more or less hint at the secrets of the sudden rise of some Valyrians from a small nomadic people 5 or 6,000 years ago. Either the Valyrians are born special, and they have these noble bloodlines, since they were nomads, or these things should not have appeared in this world. In addition to the black stone buildings, the construction and forging methods of Valyrian steel, and the control of dragons, there is another mystery left by Valyria in this world, that is, the glass candle. It has been hundreds of years since the last time the glass candle burned. The glass candle burned for a while after the dragon disappeared, and then went out. Then it burned again, when the red comet passed through the sky many years ago. Even when the glass candle went out, there was a rule in the citadel that every assistant maester had to keep vigil in the cell of the night before he took the oath to become a maester, and he could not carry any light, only a glass candle placed in the room to accompany him. And the assistant maester had to spend the night in darkness unless he could light the candle. According to the maesters, this was to warn the new maester that even if a person is full of knowledge, he is not omnipotent. However, the reburning of the glass candle is generally considered to be the return of the magic tide. and what the lizard mastered was the method of using glass candles. You know? Viserys was slightly startled when he heard the words of the Eastern Shadowbinder, because this made him feel a little familiar. The wizards of the ancient Free Fortress could see the scene far away in the sky through glass candles, and they could also communicate across the continent. Isn't this the way he communicates with his Black Mist slaves? I was doing a deal with a pale holy child, and the other party gave it to me as a bonus. The lizard said bluntly. Your Majesty, you should know. The wizards of the ancient Free Fortress left too many secrets to this world, and most of these secrets can only be mastered and used by the Valyrians themselves. For us, it is a spell that can be referenced. So I can't verify the authenticity of this method. Although the lizard occasionally got the method of using glass candles in a transaction a long time ago, she had no way to use this method. Perhaps it was for this reason that the other party gave this spell to the lizard as a bonus to facilitate the transaction. But you are a dragon, you know. The lizard looked at Viserys' cheek, his eyes flickered slightly under the mask, and then he spoke meaningfully. I saw you standing behind everyone. Chapter 2 Wait a minute. Chapter 804 Surrender. Now, because of the natural disaster, all these people who have gathered in Westeros are indeed talented, and they all have their own skills. The Red Monk Makoro took out the method of building black stone buildings, and the Shadowbinder Quelix provided a spell to use glass candles. The rest of the people, whether messengers, princes or governors, are not stupid. If they were stupid, they would not be able to reach this position. After returning from the foundry, Viserys received a request for an audience with Tormo Frega, the Seeking of Bravos, saying that there was an important matter to discuss. Viserys and the new Seeking had a chance encounter. The one who once cooperated with Viserys was the previous Seeking, Ferragantalion, but he was later impeached from the position of Seeking, and then it was said that he died of illness in prison. The former chief swordsman of the Seeking of Bravos, Quirrell Valentine, later died in prison due to an accident, and Ferragantalion's traces in Bravos were completely wiped out. Some people in Bravos claim that this incident was done by the current Seeking, but there is no evidence to support this statement, so it is just a subjective conjecture. However, it is certain that Tormo Frega is definitely an ambitious careerist. His family is not the top family in Bravos, but through a series of plans and some coincidences, he eventually became the next Seeking, and made the Frega family the top family in Bravos. Now Tormo Frega took the initiative to find Viserys. No one knows what he and the Emperor of the Valyrian Empire are talking about in secret. But in the garden of the Red Castle, Tyrion was leading a man with dark hair and a hooked nose towards Mega's tower. Think about it, Jaime. There is no turning back this time. In the garden of the Red Castle, Tyrion walked in front of the long winding stone path, then tilted his head slightly, and spoke in a low voice. The royal garden of the Red Castle is still the familiar place it once was. Many famous stories have also been born here. In fact, since the Targaryen family built the Red Castle, many stories have been born in every inch of land here in the past 200 years or so. But now not only are things different, but even the appearance of the Red Castle has changed dramatically. Because there has been no sunlight for a long time, the palace gardens that were once colorful and fragrant are now only bare pillars and winding paths. The land has been abandoned. Viserys was upset when he saw this, so he ordered the royal steward to shovel all the dead flowers. The entire Red Castle has lost its vitality and has become much more bleak. Yeah. The man with black hair and a hooked nose seemed to be equally worried. He looked at the changes in the Red Castle and was slightly distracted, as if thinking of the bits and pieces that had happened here. But in the end, he nodded and affirmed after hearing Tyrion's words. Before he came to Mega's tower, he took a far look at his biological son Joffrey. Now Joffrey has been abandoned by his adoptive father, biological mother and sister one after another. He has become completely suspicious and suspects that everyone wants to attack him. His mental problems have been infinitely magnified. However, Viserys did not intend to get rid of him. Joffrey in this world is generally a pitiful person, but the bad things he did when he was a child show that he is still that kind of person. If Joffrey is not interfered with, he will still go on the same crazy path as the Mad King. In essence, Joffrey is not Robert II, but the Mad King II. He is even more like the son of the Mad King than Viserys. Tyrion led Jaime to look at Joffrey from a distance and did not dare to come forward to recognize him, but Joffrey still found them. However, Joffrey did not come forward to greet his uncle. He was just a little panicked, just like seeing everyone. He saw the person next to his uncle Tyrion. In a trance, the poor blonde boy thought he saw his former uncle, or his biological father, the handsome knight with flowing golden hair and a sharp smile. Joffrey had a vague feeling in his heart when he was still Prince Joffrey, but he didn't want to believe this fact until his mother admitted to having an affair with his uncle Jaime in the public trial. Joffrey looked at his uncle from a distance. He was a middle-aged man with black hair and a hooked nose standing beside him. He thought he saw his biological father in a trance, and his breathing was slightly rapid. But in the end, he found that the illusion in front of him was shattered. There stood a stranger he didn't know. Joffrey was disappointed, and once again turned around, and ran away as before, and went into his own stable. He felt that the smell of horse manure there would make him feel at ease. At least he was still the well-deserved king in his own stable, just as he had heard a saying among the Ironborn, that a man with a ship is not a slave, and every captain is the king of his own ship. Now Joffrey is the king in the stable, at least no one will disturb him here. Joffrey after Jaime followed Tyrion to see his biological son from a distance. He was silent for a long time, and he didn't know what kind of mixed feelings he had in his heart. Compared with the decision he was going to make next, he didn't know how to face his biological son, so he just asked Tyrion to take him to see Joffrey from a distance. Tyrion also looked at his brother without saying anything, then smacked his lips, lowered his head, and looked at the ground, as if he wanted to count the ants on the ground. But unfortunately, after the sun disappeared, the ants on the ground seemed to be rare. It would be great if the damn mosquitoes and flies could disappear like ants. Everything has a spirit, except mosquitoes. Tyrion opened his black and green eyes, and looked at the ground for a long time, but couldn't find it. His fingers rubbed and fiddled with the soft beard on his chin for a while, and then sighed. This is a sign that Tyrion is a little anxious and thinking. He is not anxious about Joffrey. Joffrey has become like this for many years. Tyrion has tried to enlighten his nephew, but unfortunately failed. Joffrey does not trust him at all, and thinks that Tyrion is also going to harm him, so Tyrion has no choice but to let it go. He is anxious about Jaime's next decision. The two brothers have discussed this decision for a long time recently. Tyrion tried to persuade Jaime not to commit suicide, because in his opinion, this is simply an act of suicide. However, Jaime has made up his mind, or he is discouraged. Since hearing that Cersei has remarried again, Jaime's state has been a little wrong. I've thought it through, Tyrion. However, before Tyrion could figure out how to stop Jaime from committing suicide, Jaime was silent for a while, and finally made the final decision. No matter what, I don't want to escape anymore. I'm the biological father of Joffrey and Myrcella. I should stand up and admit it, instead of letting Cersei stand up and admit it on my behalf. Perhaps this is why Cersei is disappointed in me. Jaime decided to go to Meager's holdfast in person, to meet Viserys and surrender. He was willing to accept the punishment he should bear for breaking his oath that year, whether it was life or death. But I'm not the Kingslayer. Chapter 805 Jaime's decision. Tyrion led Jaime, who had disguised himself, towards Meager's holdfast. Originally, Jaime wanted to take off his faceless man disguise and reveal his true face. It would be best if everyone, even his sister who married to the Iron Islands, knew that the Kingslayer had returned to turn himself in. Although Jaime never admitted the derogatory title of Kingslayer in his heart, this was also one of the knots in his heart that he had never mentioned to others. Although Jaime could still confidently pretend that he didn't care when he was called the Kingslayer, he couldn't do it now. Jaime wanted to show his true face and confess openly. He thought that the silver-haired boy who was personally sent to the carriage by him might hate him for killing his father, King Aerys, and making him wander for so many years. Jaime hoped that Viserys would set up a public trial for him, just like his father Tywin, who was beheaded in front of the Red Keep. Jaime was also in the crowd when Tywin was on trial. He witnessed his father being condemned by thousands of people and then beheaded by Sandor Clegane, the Hound. Jaime wanted Viserys to set up a public trial for the Kingslayer. He could face thousands of people at the trial and explain everything that happened. Why did he draw his sword and kill King Aerys? What happened in the court? Jaime wanted to explain everything clearly and then die calmly. How future generations will judge him, what will his honor be like, and whether he will still wear the hat of the Kingslayer. These are naturally things after his death, and Jaime doesn't have to worry about it. However, Jaime's crazy idea was strongly opposed by his younger brother Tyrion, but unfortunately Jaime had made up his mind and Tyrion had no way to persuade Jaime to waver. But in the end, Tyrion still used all his strength to persuade Jaime not to meet Viserys with his true face. At least this way there is still room for maneuver. Stop. The night was long and the dark sky was the eternal theme, but the palace, the political core of the empire, was still brightly lit. Tyrion and Jaime walked towards Meagher's holdfast, and at this moment, the Unsullied guards were patrolling outside Meagher's holdfast despite the severe cold. The main passage leading to Meagher's holdfast was a drawbridge, and torches were burning on the tall and solid outer walls of the palace, bringing warmth and dispelling darkness. The palace guards held round shields and spears in their hands, and their eyes scanned the dignitaries coming in and out of the red castle in front of them with cold and meticulous eyes, until they saw Tyrion and Jaime walking towards this side, and then stopped them for inspection as a routine. The leader of this group of palace guards was an unsullied captain wearing a helmet with two spikes. He recognized Tyrion when he saw him. This was the most famous dwarf in the empire, no one else. He did not speak to Tyrion, but just nodded slightly. Then he turned his eyes to the middle-aged man beside Tyrion, looked him up and down and said, "Lord Tyrion, who is this?" If it was just Tyrion who came to see his majesty, the unsullied guards would not stop him. After all, Tyrion was quite diligent in his work and often had things to ask his majesty, but Tyrion also brought a stranger with him, so he naturally had to ask. Tyrion turned his head and looked at Jaime, making sure that he had not revealed the truth, and then turned back again, nodded calmly and explained in a calm manner. He is the person his majesty wants to see. Tyrion's explanation made the captain of the Unsullied not doubt it at all. Because when Viserys was busy with official duties, he often called in some people they had never seen before, and some were nobles from the empire, who came to King's Landing to see his majesty. After all, the territory of the empire is so vast, and there are even more nobles with fiefs on this vast land of the empire. Not to mention, that the Unsullied couldn't recognize them. Now the number of nobles has increased, several times more than in the time of Robert Baratheon, and all kinds of strange emblems and clan languages have sprung up like mushrooms after rain, and even the nobles themselves can't recognize who is who. Now the education of noble children is to learn the emblems and clan languages of the main families of the empire, and when strangers talk to each other, they will hand over a business card that symbolizes their family, to facilitate the other party to understand. However, Tyrion is the emperor's personal advisor and a member of the royal council. The people he brought as a guide will not have any problems. "Lord Tyrion, please come in." So the captain of the Unsullied Guard simply checked that the two were not wearing weapons, and then let them in. "But your majesty is busy now. The king of Bravos asked to see you not long ago. You may have to wait a while." However, there was Viserys' personal guard Gendry in the Red Castle, and the captain of the Unsullied didn't say much. Even if they went in, they would not disturb the conversation between his majesty and the king of the sea, because Gendry would stop them and arrange his majesty's time properly. However, at this moment, footsteps were heard in Meagher's holdfast, and Bravos-seeking Tormund Frege came out. He was wearing a grey purple robe and a shell necklace around his neck. He was followed by his chief swordsman, a thin and sharp-eyed man. Because Jaime had undergone a simple disguise, the Bravos-seeking did not recognize him. He only saw Tyrion stop slightly and greeted him humbly and then left. "You still have room to regret now, Jaime." However, after Tyrion greeted the Bravos-seeking, he looked at his back curiously. He didn't know what the seeking wanted to see his majesty, and then waited until he walked into Meagher's holdfast, and Tyrion persuaded his brother again. But unfortunately, Jaime had made up his mind and shook his head, and Tyrion was helpless. "You're just sulking." This brother of his has just that kind of temperament and personality. He is very emotional and easily acts on impulse. He does whatever he thinks of without considering the consequences. Even though he has become a faceless man and has experienced many tortures, he is still essentially the same. But perhaps this is a real Jaime. Tyrion should be thankful that Jaime is still the same person. Tyrion couldn't persuade Jaime to change his mind at the last minute, so he could only bite the bullet and lead him to Viserys' study. At this moment, Viserys was in his study thinking about what Tall McGregor had just proposed. At this moment, there was a knock on his door. Chapter 2 Wait a minute. Chapter 806 Regret. Your Majesty, Lord Tyrion wants to see you. Viserys had 2 servants. Robb Stark was supposed to be the governor of the north, but unfortunately he was forced to stay in King's Landing because of the long night. Now the person on duty outside Viserys' door was Gendry, the young man with short black hair, who was getting stronger and stronger, knocked on Viserys' door and spoke respectfully. Tyrion? Viserys was slightly startled when he heard this, because he didn't turn Tyrion over, but he still put away the proposal of the King of Bravos in his mind, and nodded to allow Tyrion to come in. Your Majesty. However, Tyrion didn't just come in alone. There was also a man with short black hair and a hooked nose next to him. He looked at Viserys with a sharp gaze, and when Viserys saw this man, his eyes fell on him, because he could see that this man was wearing a mask on his face. The faceless man's face changing trick was indeed perfect, but since it was fake, there would be flaws. Viserys has a power similar to bullet time. In the same time, the world in his eyes will become slower and more detailed, so he only needs to glance at it to see the flaw on the man's cheek. But Viserys was not panicked when facing the faceless man. The famous faceless man did scare everyone in the world, but he was an exception, because the two were no longer on the same level. Faceless man. Viserys had long silver gold hair freely draped over his shoulders, and a pair of lavender eyes were clear and bright. He looked at this man, and then looked at Tyrion. Tyrion's expression was slightly nervous. Your Majesty, he is. Tyrion was about to explain, but Jaime on the other side saw that he had been exposed, so he tore off the disguise on his face and revealed his true face. It's me, Your Highness. Long time no see. Jaime tore off the disguise to reveal a thin, slightly sunken cheek. His eye bags drooped a little, making him look much older, with messy stubble, and his golden hair turned grey. Jaime is only in his 30s now, but he looks much older than his age. Except for the face that still has the outline of the high-spirited blonde knight, there is no trace of Jaime in the past. His back is no longer handsome, and there is no pride in his eyes. He is just like an ordinary person. For people like Jaime, the title of ordinary person is the biggest irony to him. There are fewer and fewer people in this world who can call Viserys prince, but Jaime happens to be one of them. Because he joined the Kingsguard at the age of 15, Jaime watched Viserys grow up and escorted him to the carriage to escape to Dragonstone before the fall of King's Landing. I didn't expect it was you. Viserys looked at Jaime's face, which was still vaguely recognizable, and got over the initial slight surprise, and then spoke calmly. He didn't seem too surprised that the other party was still alive after disappearing for so many years. Although Jaime is sometimes slow-witted and is also very rash, willful, stubborn, and irritable, he is a person who becomes more and more courageous when faced with setbacks. Difficulties may knock him down for a short time, but he will stand up again in the end. Moreover, after so many years of wandering around, Jaime's hands have not been chopped off. He is also a great warrior, brave and good at fighting. I'm curious why you dare to appear in front of me. After the initial surprise, Viserys did not show much ripples, and even asked curiously. His eyes turned to Tyrion, who led Jaime in. If Tyrion had not brought Jaime in, he might not even be able to get close to him. Even if the other party has become a faceless man, it is indeed beyond his expectation that Jaime has become a faceless man after disappearing for so many years. Is it because you believe your brother will protect you and persuade me to spare your life? Your Majesty, Tyrion on the other side heard Viserys' words, and his heart once again rose to his throat. Just now, when he saw that there was no hatred in Viserys' eyes, when he saw Jaime, but only surprise and scrutiny, Tyrion was slightly relieved, and felt that this matter might not be impossible to get away with, but Viserys' subsequent words made him have to be worried again. Tyrion was about to explain something, but was stopped by his brother again. This matter has nothing to do with Tyrion. He is 100% loyal to you, Your Majesty. I forced him to bring me to see you. This time, the knight with golden hair mixed with many greys stood up and blocked Tyrion and spoke. He did not call Viserys Your Highness again. That sentence was just a farewell to the past. Because when James sent the silver-haired young man in front of him, who was still a terrified boy, to the carriage, he said, "Your Highness," as a farewell. But time flies. The boy is no longer the second prince that James protected, but the young emperor who created the Valyrian Empire. When James was a killer of the faceless men in Bravos, across the narrow sea, he often heard about the other side. "You want to see me? For what?" Viserys heard what James said, and was curious about what he wanted to do. If James wanted to assassinate him, after becoming a faceless man, it would be a pure idiotic act, because since James was in the Faceless Men organization, he should know who destroyed it. Atonement. James did not hesitate to face Viserys' question, and spoke directly. "I killed your father, King Aerys, and I cut his throat from behind. I'm willing to stand trial." This is a statement that anyone who hears it can't help but get angry. Even people with good tempers can't stand it. After all, this is the enemy who killed his father. However, Viserys, who was sitting behind the desk, had a calm expression from beginning to end. He didn't really care how Aerys second died. After all, he didn't regard him as his father from the bottom of his heart. "Do you want to find your sister Cersei? You want to tell him that you are back?" The silver-haired young man looked at the two people standing in front of him with a pair of lavender eyes, and then suddenly spoke after James finished speaking. "Do you want her to regret it?" Chapter 807 Trial. This time it was James' turn to be slightly stunned. He didn't expect Viserys to hit the nail on the head, although his inner pride made him never admit it. Of course not. James opened his mouth and was about to refute, but Viserys shook his head slightly. "This is really your character, and only you can do such a thing." James said that he coerced Tyrion to take him to see him, and Viserys knew it was bullshit. Others don't know the depth of their brotherhood, but Viserys knows it. Therefore, when he met James, he used the power of the old gods to find the time when Jaime and Tyrion were in contact, heard every word they talked, and came to these conclusions. The shorter the time span, the faster Viserys will wake up. He didn't expect that after so many blows, Jaime was still a spoiled child. But I can tell you, Jaime, even if you die in King's Landing, someone like Cersei won't regret it. This is the truth. Anyone who is familiar with Cersei knows that she is an extremely self-centered person, except for her children. But even for her own children, Cersei's patience has a certain limit. In the final analysis, Cersei's center is always on herself. She is also a spoiled child. However, no matter what kind of setbacks she has experienced, she will eventually stand up. The twins of the Lannister family are really carved out of the same mold, both in appearance and character. And if Jaime really died in King's Landing, Cersei would be very sad to hear about it. But sadness does not mean regret. She will accept the news of Jaime's death and continue to live her own life until one day she completely forgets him. Viserys guessed Jaime's inner thoughts and spoke bluntly. But when Jaime heard Viserys' words, an indignant expression suddenly appeared on his face. He seemed unwilling to believe that Cersei would not care about his death. "Oh, how do you want to know, Cersei?" However, Viserys saw the subtle changes in Jaime's expression and seemed to see through Jaime's inner thoughts and immediately raised his eyebrows. "Cersei." He leaned back slightly on the chair with his hands on the desk in front of him and looked at the expression on Jaime's face calmly, recalling the beautiful blonde woman at the time, tapped his fingers on the table a few times, and then shook his head. "I don't think you want to know these processes." Jaime was stunned for a moment, and then his eyes changed slightly. As the most notorious knight in the Seven Kingdoms, it was hard to say who had a worse reputation between Gregor Clegane and Jaime Lannister. The Mountain was cruel, slaughtering and burning a village at will, raping and looting, and doing all kinds of evil. But Jaime Lannister did not do such a thing. On the contrary, everyone thought he was a great warrior. Because when he was wearing his snow white armor, a white cloak, and holding a long sword, few people in the Seven Kingdoms could be his opponents, whether on horseback or on foot. And Jaime also adhered to the honor of being a knight, except for the charge of regicide. But it was this only charge that directly shattered all the honors of Jaime Lannister. Because he was the most prestigious member of the Knights in the Seven Kingdoms, the King's Guard was an elite guard created to protect the royal bloodline from the beginning. but Jaime betrayed the king he was loyal to and killed him with his own hands. So there was this unforgivable charge, and no matter what Jaime did, it was a sin in the eyes of others. However, the once proud blonde knight disdained to make any excuses because he believed that a lion does not have to care what the ants under his feet think. Therefore, although Jaime was condemned by thousands of people, why did he kill the Mad King? Jaime cut his throat with his own hands and sat on the Iron Throne, laying the bloody sword across his knees, watching him die, for reasons unknown. The long-missing Kingslayer returned to King's Landing to confess his guilt, which has become an important topic in recent times, second only to the Supreme Council of Humanity. But this is limited to the nobles of the Empire and the people of King's Landing, because only those who understand this chaotic history know the hidden meaning behind this matter. Kingslayer Jaime Lannister is willing to plead guilty and be tried in the throne room of the Red Keep, and the princes and governors of the East Continent who are now in King's Landing can't help but come to join in the fun in their spare time. The throne room that can accommodate 500 people is overcrowded. Except for a few princes and governors of the East Continent, the rest are filled with nobles of the Empire. Most of the ministers in King's Landing are now gathered here, including the seriously ill Miss Toyne, who also dragged his sick body to the scene. Miss Toyne's physical condition is not very good, and Viserys feels that he will not survive this year. However, after his death, Viserys will also collect his soul and then build a temple like John Connington so that he can return to Casterly Rock as a patron saint to protect his family. Ministers of the Royal Council, such as War Minister Cargo, Personal Advisor Tyrion Lannister, and Agriculture Minister Alistair Florent, all came to the scene. Minister of Craftsman Tob Homeortho was still leading his disciples to forge the Dragon Slayer for His Majesty the Emperor, so he did not come. Finance Minister Willis Tyrrell also came to the scene, and his sister Little Rose Marguerite Tyrrell was obviously dressed up. She stood beside her brother wearing bright jewelry and a beautiful long dress, looking quite bright and beautiful. Recently, there have been some rumors in King's Landing, saying that Miss Marguerite Tyrrell is actually His Majesty's secret lover. But these rumors only spread for a short time and soon dissipated, because there was no evidence to support them. However, in the eyes of the people of King's Landing, the young lady of the Tyrrell family is beautiful and kind-hearted. She often gives alms and money to the poor, and has a high reputation among the people of King's Landing. Therefore, they think that Marguerite is definitely worthy of Viserys, and they are happy that His Majesty the Emperor will marry another one. There are funny people in every world, and such a beautiful girl can't be given to others in vain. But Rob, who is still in King's Landing, was somewhat shocked when he heard the rumor. He even claimed that he would duel with the rumormonger. However, the person who spread these rumors certainly would not stand up to duel with Rob. But this incident has further strengthened Rob's intention to leave. He decided not to return to the north to inherit his family business, but when the Empire organized an army to expedition to the East Continent, he would take a ship to another world to make achievements and gain respect. Chapter 2 Wait a minute. Chapter 808 Execution. In the trial of the Red Keep, the throne room was brightly lit, with towering stone pillars supporting the dome of the hall. A circle of blazing flames surrounded the stone pillars, illuminating everyone here, bringing warmth and dispelling the cold. The unsullied soldiers held round shields and spears, and stood on duty with cold faces, while the imperial nobles who were watching the trial were all silent, standing on both sides of the throne room. Crash. Not long after that, the sound of metal friction came from the door of the throne room in the distance, and the White Knight Jaime Lannister, who had committed the crime of regicide, was escorted in. Two unsullied soldiers followed behind him without pushing him, but let him walk through the walkway in the throne room facing the Iron Throne, and then walk to the trial platform. The imperial nobles who were watching this trial couldn't help but look over. Some of them had never seen the Kingslayer, and were curious about his appearance. Most of them were new nobles born after the establishment of the Empire. There are also many nobles from the time of Robert and even King Aerys in the throne room. Some of them have seen Jaime, but now they can't help but sigh a little when they see his changes. The 34-year-old knight is no longer handsome and blonde, but has deep eyes and unshaven beard, but he can still be recognized as Jaime Lannister. Time is a butcher's knife, but more of it is that the days of escaping outside are not easy, making the original Lannister lion become a wild dog under the tree at the village head. The trial of the Kingslayer was also very smooth. After all, he was a member of the King's Guard and had made a sacred oath, but he killed his own king, which was an unforgivable crime. Therefore, when he was sentenced to death and would be sent to the gallows to be hanged, Jaime looked a little lonely, but he didn't argue, just nodded. Yeah, this is the punishment I deserve. On the other side, Tyrion, who was standing in the crowd, heard his words and suddenly became a little anxious. Jaime, please put on black clothes. He couldn't help but remind him in a low voice. Tyrion was standing not far from Jaime, but Jaime turned a deaf ear to Tyrion's reminder. Instead, he was immersed in his own world and then continued to speak. I had a dream. I dreamed of my 5 sworn brothers, Oswell Rivers, Jon Derry, Lewin Martell, White Bull and Dawnblade. And among them, the Prince of Dragonstone came to me with a crown of mist and sorrow, and his long hair fluttering. Jaime was telling his dream, and everyone in the throne room, except the anxious Tyrion, couldn't help holding their breath. Of course, they knew that the Prince of Dragonstone that Jaime mentioned was not Daenerys, but Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, the biological brother of His Majesty the Emperor. Then his body began to burn, emitting a cold light, changing between black, white, and red. He said to me, I once entrusted my wife and children to you, Jaime. But you killed them. Jaime imitated Rhaegar's questioning tone, and his voice echoed in the silent hall. Everyone present couldn't help but feel a little creepy when they heard it, and even looked up at the ceiling above their heads, as if they really saw Rhaegar's ghost questioning Jaime with their own eyes, fearing that Rhaegar was here watching them at this moment. When Rhaegar was about to leave King's Landing to lead the army to quell the rebellion, Jaime asked to go with the army, but was rejected by Rhaegar. Rhaegar left Jaime in King's Landing and asked him to guard the king, his wife and 2 children. The blonde knight, whose hair was already mixed with a little grey, couldn't help but tremble slightly when he mentioned the words in the dream. He recalled the scene when he said goodbye to Rhaegar in the courtyard of the Red Keep. At that time, Jaime Lannister was only 17 years old, but now he has been displaced and twice as old. Jaime did not expect that his farewell to Rhaegar would be a farewell forever, nor did he expect so many things to happen later, which even directly destroyed his life. And I don't know how to start the questioning of His Highness and the 5 sworn brothers. I didn't expect my father to do anything to them. Jaime looked terrified and confused, and then he was escorted to the execution ground outside the throne room by the unsullied soldiers who came forward. The whole place in the throne room was silent, with only the sound of the chains on Jaime's body as he walked out, and Tyrion finally couldn't help but take the initiative to stand up and plead for his brother, asking Viserys to give Jaime a chance to put on black clothes. This was what Viserys had promised him before. As long as Jaime took the initiative to ask to wear black clothes after the verdict, Viserys would agree. Whether Jaime could get the qualification to wear black clothes depended on what he said and how he said it in the public trial in the throne room. But unfortunately, Jaime did not take the initiative to ask to wear black clothes after the trial, and Tyrion's request was rejected by Jaime himself. After a lot of inner struggle, Jaime was now determined to die, and he just wanted to end it all as soon as possible. Then the Kingslayer was escorted to the execution ground with a rope around his neck, and the person in charge of the execution was Sandor Clegane, the Hound, who was now the King's lawman. Half of his face was still as ferocious as it was after being burned, with sharp cheekbones and thick eyebrows and grey eyes. He was wearing the golden armor of the King's lawman, and he held a big sword for beheading in both hands in front of him. Sandor looked at Jaime with a complicated look in his eyes, then spat in his palm, rubbed his rough palm, and tightened the hilt in his hand. I started killing people when I was 12 years old, and I have killed countless people so far, no matter they are from aristocratic families with a long history, fat rich men in velvet, or arrogant noble knights. Your father, Lord Tywin, died in my hands. I didn't expect that you would die in my hands too. Both of you died in my hands. This may also be a kind of shitty fate. Sandor's voice was a little vulgar, but it was still possible to hear some pity. Sandor still recognized that Jaime was a great warrior. Hurry up. Good dog. However, James didn't seem to be in the mood to chat with Sander. He just glanced at him and felt a rope around his neck. This little thing will become a stranger next and take his life. He never thought that he would die on the gallows one day. When Sander heard what James said, he did not hesitate. He drew his sword and raised it high, then chopped it down fiercely and cut the rope on the gallows. Boom. James' body was quickly pulled up and the rope around his neck was instantly tightened. His face turned red and then a terrifying purple. Ho ho ho. Although he did not want to lose his composure and wanted to die with dignity, his instinct for survival still made him open his mouth and make a hoarse sound, wanting to breathe fresh air into his lungs. In the brightly lit throne room, a black mist that was invisible to others seemed to be attracted and flew from outside into Viserys's hands. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 809 Awakening. Jaime Lannister was tried for regicide and was eventually hanged in the square outside the Red Keep. His body was then put down, and after the death was confirmed by the Royal Justice Sander Clegane, the news was reported to the throne room, and the silent atmosphere here was broken. Someone took the lead in applauding, and the rest of the nobles followed suit. Margaery raised her hand and was about to applaud, but her brother Willis, who was standing beside her, grabbed her hand. Little Rose was slightly stunned and looked at her brother, then saw Willis gestured at him, turned around and looked at the other side, and then found that Tyrion's eyes were a little red, and the other royal ministers only applauded slightly and then put it down. And Viserys, who was sitting on the Iron Throne, did not have too much joy of revenge, just nodded expressionlessly, and then stood up and announced the end of the trial. Farewell, Your Majesty. All the nobles of the empire below said goodbye in unison. Then, under the escort of the King's Guard, Viserys left the throne room through the small door behind the Iron Throne and returned to Meagher's holdfast. In fact, Viserys felt that the death of the Mad King was his own fault. He had heard James' reasons for killing the Mad King in Meagher's holdfast, and he had experienced it himself. As a bystander, he witnessed the final madness of the Mad King as the last king of the Targaryen dynasty after the fall of King's Landing. The thin middle-aged man with messy hair that grew past his shoulders and nails that were a foot long was only in his 40s, but he looked like he was in his 50s or 60s. He sat on the Iron Throne with Aegon IV's huge and exquisite crown inlaid with dragon patterns on his head, and then hysterically ordered the White Knight to cut off his father's head and come to see him. But Jaime did not obey the Mad King's order, but drew his sword and killed Rosset, the pyromancer who was ordered by the Mad King to destroy the entire King's Landing. Burn them all. Burn them all at home. Burn them in their beds. The Mad King ordered the pyromancer Rosset to ignite the wildfire hidden in the streets and alleys under King's Landing, blowing up and burning the entire King's Landing, and hundreds of thousands of people alive. Viserys stood by and watched him go crazy, watching the 17-year-old blonde young knight draw his sword and kill the pyromancer and then approach the Mad King. The Mad King seemed to have woke up at this time. He turned and ran towards the back door behind the throne room, where Viserys had just left, shouting as he ran, "Burn them." However, the Mad King fell on the steps in front of the Iron Throne. After running a few steps, Jaime came forward with a bloody sword in his hand. The Mad King began to beg for mercy, but Jaime did not show any mercy and directly cut his throat. At this time, the Lannister army also rushed into the Red Castle, and Sir Elly Westerling and Earl Roland Crakehall, under the command of Duke Tywin, led everyone to arrive. They witnessed everything Jaime did, and then asked him if he wanted to establish a new king, but Jaime did not answer, and then sat on the Iron Throne, and put the bloody sword on his knees, quietly waiting for the next person to come. He wanted to see who would take the kingdom away from him. However, the next person to enter the throne room was Eddard Stark, the Duke of Winterfell. From the first sight of Jaime sitting on the Iron Throne and the Mad King lying under the throne, he determined that he should be sentenced to death. but James never explained why he killed the Mad King from beginning to end. What was his real motive for killing the Mad King? And he did not reveal that the Mad King wanted to blow up King's Landing in one breath and burn hundreds of thousands of people alive at the last moment. James just carried the charge of Kingslayer on his head and then secretly searched for the other two fire wizards, Beliz and Golgoth, who participated in the Mad King's plan to burn the city, and then killed them one by one. However, the secrets he didn't tell at the beginning. Now at the last moment, even when he was sentenced to hang, he didn't tell them. Viserys originally thought that Jaime might tell all the truth, let everyone re-evaluate him as a person, and even remove the charge of Kingslayer. After all, he saved hundreds of thousands of lives. However, Jaime didn't know what to think, and he didn't tell the secret until the final sentence of hanging. He also didn't choose to beg for mercy and put on black clothes, but went to death calmly, ending his stumbling life. Then James' soul flew into Viserys' hands and was protected by him. Viserys had no plan for James' soul, but his actions made him feel regretful. Viserys returned to his study, and then James' soul emerged from his palm. This is a small black fog, but in this black fog there is a mysterious change. The mystery of the soul is the biggest mystery of mankind so far. Viserys used the divine fire to reawaken Jaime. Jaime, who had just been hanged outside the city, and whose body was not even cold, appeared in front of Viserys with a dazed look. Is this the Seven Hells? Why does everyone who is reawakened by me ask me such a question? Viserys stood in front of the balcony of the study, looking at Jaime floating not far away, and said calmly, every soul can transform its own image. What Viserys did not expect was that Jaime still transformed into the image of a white knight in his subconscious. Isn't this experience of the King's Guard a nightmare for you? Viserys asked. After the initial days, Jaime still reacted. After all, Jaime is still a member of the Lannister family. Although he is sometimes willful, he is still smart enough. He used his fastest speed and imagination to understand his current situation. However, despite being shocked, he still answered Viserys' question. Although it is this white robe that defiles me, I still remember my oath. Perhaps it was for this reason that Jaime killed the Mad King to prevent the disaster from coming, but did not expose the Mad King's crimes. Viserys, why did you resurrect me? However, after answering Viserys' question, Jaime couldn't help but ask back. I didn't resurrect you, you're just a soul. Obviously, Jaime's understanding of his current situation was still biased, because the soul body was so real that he thought he was resurrected. You died once. Now you can start again. Chapter 2 Wait a minute. Chapter 810. Dispatching troops. After a month-long negotiation, the human coalition finally reached an agreement on the plan to send troops. The rebuilt Valyrian Empire dispatched troops from Andalus, Pentis and King's Landing, totaling more than 50,000 people. They first landed and assembled in Pentis, and then followed the dragon road left by the Valyrians to Novus, rested temporarily in Novus, and then continued along the ancient road to Koha. On the other side, as a representative of the trading city-state, Bravos sent out all its invincible fleets, and contributed the world-famous purple-sailed purple-hulled merchant ship fleet, and the sailors on the ships as ships for the transportation and dispatch of coalition materials, responsible for helping the coalition to ensure the stability of material supply. As for the invincible fleet on the other side, they went out in full force to harass the rear of the White Walkers from the sea, cut off the White Walkers' retreat, attacked the fallen Aben Island, and strived to be the first to clear these islands. At the same time, Bravos also sent out 10,000 troops to join the coalition to fight together. They first set out from Bravos by ship, then joined Loras's fleet, and took their soldiers, landed at Battle Axe Point, crossed the Undercurrent River, and finally joined at Koha. Although the battle line is now eroded, the kingdoms of the Orba Peninsula and the Kingdom of Salar are struggling to resist, but the Empire and the major city-states in the west will naturally not underestimate the enemy and rush to save the Kingdom of Orba and the Kingdom of Salar. Everyone has only one life, and it is better for others to die than to die themselves. Therefore, the envoys of the Kingdom of Orba and the Kingdom of Salar were angry or requested, but they could not change the coalition's plan to set the center of the meeting at Koha. As another powerful city-state among the trading cities, Volantis has a long and powerful history. They are the well-deserved overlords on the west coast of Essos. Although they are now in decline, their heritage still exists. This time, Volantis sent two archons to participate in the Supreme Human Conference in King's Landing, namely, Archon Narciso Wismer of the Elephant Party and Archon Malacha Medjaya of the Tiger Party. Volantis sent 30,000 troops up the Roine River to Koha, carrying a lot of food. Volantis' route was the easiest, as they didn't have to take any water route, and they might be the first coalition troops to reach Koha. However, during the negotiations, there was a small episode regarding the number of troops Volantis would send. That was when the Elephant Party Governor Narciso Wismer said strongly that Volantis was far away from the White Walkers, and by the time the White Walkers reached Volantis' doorstep, the long night might have already passed. But in fact, due to Volantis' geographical location, if the White Walkers really reached their doorstep one day, it would be no different from the end of the world. So Narciso Wismer wanted to lie down and give up, and was unwilling to send so many soldiers. However, there was a secret news that Narciso Wismer's family was engaged in the slave trade business in Volantis. Many of the Tiger Cloaks were private armies of the Wismer family. Sending a large number of slave soldiers to participate in the war would have a huge impact on his family's strength and business. But Narciso Wismer's behavior undoubtedly triggered public anger. After a meeting one day, Narciso Wismer returned to his residence in King's Landing to rest. However, that night, the Archon from the Volantis Elephant Party seemed to have a nightmare. He shouted in the room that the guy who had just been hanged a few days ago was chasing him, attracting many people to watch. Then Narciso Wismer seemed to have been scared to death before he woke up from the nightmare. His breathing was stagnant and the pupils of his eyes were dilated. The fact that Narciso Wismer was scared to death caused some discussion in King's Landing. People rumored that the room was haunted, so they hid far away. However, no one sympathized with the other party. After all, this person had been destroying the atmosphere of the negotiations. Even another Archon of Volantis, Malacha Mika, did not come to mourn, but secretly applauded. The loss of an Archon of the Elephant Party was an opportunity for the Tiger Party. The Western world, led by the Valyrian Empire, was ready to gather in Koha and then fight against the White Walkers, while the Dothraki, Slava Bay, and Lazar on the other side were going to do their best. Because the White Walkers were closer to them, no one knew what the Great Grass Sea had become, because of its vast land and sparse population. Even the Dothraki messenger, Quellas, did not know. The war was coming, and there was already a sense of impending storm in King's Landing, because while humans were looking for countermeasures, the White Walkers did not stop at all. They were still devouring the soil for human survival day and night, so they dared not waste even a minute. In the port of King's Landing, ships ready for the expedition to the East Continent are ready, and young naval commanders are standing under torches directing the movement of ships. Viserys' adopted father, the Riverland Governor and Admiral Lord Geoffrey Bracken, will not participate in this war, because he is too old. Now his son Henry has been sent to manage the family's overall situation. Although the empire has been thriving since its establishment, the veterans who founded this country do not have the youth and vitality of the young empire. Admiral Geoffrey Bracken is now only a nominal minister of the Royal Council. The former head of the Golden Group, Mise Toyne, is seriously ill, and the former Prime Minister John Connington was shot and killed in Sky City. The Minister of Finance Illyrio went home to recuperate. The power structure of the empire has gradually changed, and the old people have gradually retired, but fortunately, the empire has not experienced a lack of successors. The reason lies in the college system established after the split of the Citadel. The Citadel is no longer the only one, but is split into several colleges scattered in major cities such as King's Landing, White Harbor, and Old Town, and these colleges are still in competition with each other. These colleges have trained a large number of talents for the empire, especially the Imperial Military Academy. Young blood is flooding the army. Now the army of the empire is full of thriving vitality. They are not afraid of the war in front of them, but their morale is high. They want to make achievements and gain a future. There was a lot of noise on the dock of Blackwater Bay. The young man with reddish brown hair from the north was wearing leather armor and holding the reins in his hands. Before boarding the ship, he turned his head and looked in the direction of King's Landing for the last time. He invited Marguerite to see him off, but unfortunately she did not show up. He felt a little lost in his heart, but he also really understood what she meant. Then Robb Stark clenched his fists, completely cut off the ignorant feelings from the bottom of his heart, then turned his head and looked to the east, taking a deep breath. There is his new journey. Chapter 811 Caitlyn's idea. The first batch of Valyrian Empire soldiers boarded the warship and sailed to Pentus. The young wolf of Winterfell was also on the ship. Robb Stark mustered up the courage to cut off his love and boarded the warship to Pentus, determined to make achievements. In the north, Winterfell. When Robb set out on his journey and looked east, a black raven also flew to the Stark family's residence. Maester Luwin, whose hair had fallen out, took a handwritten letter from the young master and delivered it to Lady Catelyn's room. Madam, Master Luwin. The reddish-brown-haired woman was wearing a decent thick light blue dress. Her face was slightly haggard, and she sat in her room with her husband. But at this moment, she was alone. Catelyn had been alone in her empty room for several years. Her husband Ed had rebelled many years ago because of his mistakes. Now he is watching on the Great Wall. He will stay on the Great Wall for the rest of his life to atone for his sins and cannot return. Therefore, Lady Catelyn has been a widow for many years. Fortunately, although Lady Catelyn is very beautiful, with auburn hair, blue eyes and slender fingers, she also maintains a good figure and a noble temperament. But everyone who knows her knows that Catelyn is upright and honest, and acts according to responsibility rather than desire. Even if she is a widow, she will not betray her honor and her husband. Now Lady Catelyn has put all her thoughts on her children. Catelyn is 2 years older than Cersei. She is just 36 years old this year. She gave birth to 4 children for Eddard, Robb, Sansa, Arya and Bran. The only similarity between her and Cersei is that both of them love their children very much. Originally, Catelyn and Eddard planned to have another child after Bran was born, but unfortunately, the wildlings began to appear frequently outside the wall on a large scale at that time, provoking war. Eddard followed his responsibility as the Guardian of the North and left home to guard the wall from then on. Since then, the Stark family has been declining step by step. The two no longer have any opportunities to carry out husband and wife activities, and the child in this plan did not appear. Now, looking at Lady Catelyn sitting in front of the fire, looking haggard, Master Luwin, whose hair had already fallen out, couldn't help showing distress in his demise. Madam, the young master has made up his mind, so don't worry about it anymore. The young master has the blood of the wolf flowing in his body. Sooner or later, he will have to take charge of the North, and must do so. Although Robb is still the governor of the North in name, he is a governor of the North who has never managed the North for even a day. Moreover, this position of governor was also granted by His Majesty according to the tradition of the Northmen, not won by Robb's own ability. In other words, although the Northmen will manage the Northmen, the position of governor may not still belong to the Stark family in the future. Although most people are still confused now, if other northern families understand this, they may not support the Stark family as much as they do. Therefore, the status of the Stark family is still quite precarious now, and it is very likely to be challenged by other families in the future. When talking about these, we have to cite the loyalty of Lord Rickard Karstark. As the Grand Steward of the North, he almost single-handedly suppressed the chaos in the North and helped their feudal lords, the Stark family, to maintain their rule. Even though the Stark family only had some orphans and widows who were easy to bully, there was not even a man who could talk to them in the family. The older children, Theon Greyjoy, was an adopted son, Jon Snow was just a bastard, and Bran was too young. Robb is now in King's Landing. As the head of the Stark family in the contemporary era, he must grow up, must learn to be independent, and shoulder the responsibilities of the family and the country. Fortunately, there is Lord Rickard Karstark taking care of Winterfell now, and the young master can rest assured to make achievements in the East Continent. Maester Luwin, whose hair had fallen out, sighed. The woman with reddish brown hair looked haggard, and her face looked slightly better after hearing Maester Luwin's persuasion, and then she took a deep breath and nodded. Thank you, Master Luwin. Since Robb is willing to go to the East Continent to fight those disgusting monsters, let him go. Anyway, all men of the Stark family are like this, stubborn, willful, and once they have made up their minds, no one can change them. My husband is like this, and I didn't expect Robb to be the same. Lady Catelyn shook her head and said, while the elderly Mr. Lewin on the other side was also amused by the lady's words and couldn't help laughing. By the way, Master Lewin. However, Lady Catelyn seemed to think of something at this time and then asked, I remember that Lord Rickard has a daughter, right? Rickard Karstark, the current Lord Steward of the North, has 4 children, including 3 sons and only 1 daughter. Yes. Lord Rickard has a daughter named Ali Karstark. Mr. Lewin thought for a moment, then nodded. Madam, what's the matter? I want Rob to marry this Ali Karstark. What do you think? Lady Catelyn thought for a while and asked. Rickard Karstark is now very powerful in the north, almost covering the sky with one hand. Although the Stark family is still the feudal lord of the north, there are only a few orphans and widows left in Winterfell. They either have no say or are too young. Therefore, all the affairs of the north now fall on Rickard. Although Lady Catelyn did not say it explicitly, she was still a little worried in her heart, especially when Mr. Lewin subconsciously praised her just now. The safety of the north now depends on Lord Rickard. Lady Catelyn's worries deepened. Although she was unwilling to speculate on the capable general under her husband with the greatest malice, the situation sometimes changes faster than people's thinking. Now the nobles in the north no longer come to Winterfell for something, but go directly to Kaha. Some time ago, the long night fell, and the north was tense. Tens of thousands of troops gathered at the foot of the Great Wall, and waited for it. Rickard Karstark also rushed over. But recently, it was heard that the White Walkers actually landed in the East Continent, and did not attack the Great Wall. The nobles and governors of the East Continent all ran to King's Landing to ask His Majesty the Emperor to send troops for support. The north relaxed a little. Rickard also returned to his fiefdom of Kaha not long ago. Anyway, Kaha is not far from the Great Wall. Lady Catelyn had such a plan in her heart, and no longer hesitated. She herself was a decisive person. Asking Mr. Lewin's opinion was actually asking herself. Without waiting for Mr. Lewin to answer, the reddish brown-haired woman spoke again. In that case, Mr. Lewin, write a letter to Kaha tomorrow, and ask Lord Rickard Karstark to come to Winterfell. Say I have something important to discuss. Chapter 2 Wait a minute. Chapter 812 Dragon Spear. Is this the monster you created with Victarion's blood? In a secret underground laboratory in King's Landing, Viserys was wearing a soft white velvet robe, and his long silver gold hair shone brightly under the torchlight. The female Nightmare followed behind Viserys with a torch in her hand. The two were visiting Qyburn's secret laboratory. The silver-haired young man glanced at the densely packed cages, and the red-haired female knight in a white robe beside him also looked over, but she showed disgust in her eyes, and then turned her head to look at Qyburn. Because there were monsters in these cages, they were all half-human, half-fish, horrible monsters like Victarion. The female Nightmare was originally in Highgarden as Orion's guard, protecting the safety of Her Majesty the Queen, Princess Diana, and Prince Heroes. But recently Viserys returned to King's Landing, and Orion was bored staying alone in Highgarden, and the children missed their father. Then Orion returned to King's Landing with her 2 children, to reunite with her husband. So Maya and some unsullied soldiers escorted the Queen and the 2 princes back to King's Landing. Viserys had indeed not seen Orion, Diana and Heroes for a long time. They look weaker than Victarion. At this moment, Viserys came to visit Qyburn's underground laboratory, looked at the densely packed monsters in front of him, and then turned his head and spoke. Yes, your majesty. Qyburn heard Viserys' words, and nodded slightly and spoke. Ordinary people cannot overcome the magic contained in the blood without strong willpower. The venom of the lion body manticore neutralizes part of the magic in the blood, which can be accepted by ordinary people's bodies, but the corresponding changes become much weaker. The monsters created by Qyburn are now all in a daze, with skull eyes and saliva flowing from the corners of their mouths, staring at the 3 people outside the cage, an old man, a silver-haired young man and a woman. But because they are all monsters created, based on Lord Victarion's blood, the good news is that they will all obey Lord Victarion's orders. Qyburn artificially created a group of Deep Ones. Although the strength of this group may not be as strong as the original Deep Ones, if they live in the sea, they are equally powerful. Viserys looked at these monsters and pondered for a moment, then nodded. Creating life is a taboo, but Qyburn does have this ability. He transformed the dying mountain into a magical creature super soldier. Now that Qyburn has the blood of the demonized monsters, maybe he can really develop a stable demonized potion and mass produce monsters like Robert Strong. Now Qyburn's experiment is only in the initial stage, but he still asks Qyburn to be careful, resolutely not to release these monsters, and pay attention to his own safety. After all, the world is already chaotic enough now, and he doesn't want to make it even more chaotic. The Bronze Gate Castle is still vacant for a master. The Buckler family of the Bronze Gate Castle had died in the previous war, and it was still vacant at this moment. Viserys intended to give the Bronze Gate Castle to Qyburn. Qyburn was moved, but still refused. The old man is old, and there are no descendants, your majesty. Although a castle and a family name that has been passed down are very precious to others, it is not of much value to Qyburn. It is better to let him show his talents peacefully than to give him a castle. At the same time, he is also very grateful to Viserys for his kindness. Then Qyburn called the deaf-mute girl Miss Aelia, who he adopted. The shy girl hid behind her grandfather and looked at Viserys and another sister in armor. Little Meddy is my adopted granddaughter, a poor deaf-mute girl, and also my assistant, learning knowledge from me. I hope your majesty can treat her well in the future. Miss Aelia is a very nice name, but it is not a very auspicious name. Because in the history of the Targaryen dynasty, there was a person with the same name as her, that is, Daemon Targaryen's lover and Queen Rhaenyra's intelligence chief. She was a dancer from Lies, known for her cruel and ruthless methods, and was even called the Pale Rose. But Viserys saw that the eyes of this deaf-mute girl were pure, and she was definitely not like the little Lady May with the same name as her. Qyburn hoped that Viserys could take care of his adopted granddaughter after he died one day, and Viserys nodded and agreed. After Viserys saw the results of Qyburn's experiment, another good news came a few days later. That is, the master craftsman Tob Mortho led his disciples to jointly forge several famous Valyrian steel swords in history, including the Ice of the Stark family, the Vigilance of the Hightower family, and the Broken Heart of the Tully family, and then added some auxiliary materials to forge a new magic weapon, Dragon Slayer. Although this dragon spear is called a dragon spear, it does not reach such an amazing length. The main reason is the material. Although 3 Valyrian steel swords were melted, especially the ice sword, which was enough to stand up to 2 or 3 swords, and the ice sword was taller than Robb Stark. But Viserys' dragon spear was required to be made of Valyrian steel, because he did not need to consider weight and other factors due to his physical condition, and he could swing it. Therefore, the total length of this dragon spear was about 7 feet and 2 inches, the spearhead was 8 inches long, and there were dragon patterns engraved on the spear shaft. The whole body was silver white. When Viserys held this spear in his hand, he could clearly feel the slight vibration and the coldness that penetrated his body. I hope it can also bloom in the hands of your majesty like the dusk, and become the greatest weapon in the world. After forging the Dragon Slayer spear, the master craftsman Tob Mortho was as if he was hollowed out. His face was pale, and this dragon spear was bloodthirsty. He pushed down 7 death row prisoners for blood sacrifice before suppressing the vibration of this dragon spear. Yes. Viserys' brows relaxed slightly when he heard Tob Mortho's words. He could feel the fit from the inside out when holding the dragon spear in his hand, because the dragon spear was tailor-made according to his needs. Although Valyrian steel is light, this dragon spear is made entirely of Valyrian steel and has too many materials. It is too luxurious, so its weight has exceeded 100 kilograms. It is absolutely impossible for an ordinary person to wield it. It was born for some great mission. Chapter 813, Saving the World. The Red Castle was quiet at night. Although the long night has been falling for nearly half a year, all creatures in this world, including humans, have been seriously affected, but humans have wisdom, so they have found some ways to solve the current dilemma. For example, there is a large hourglass in the Cathedral of St. Bela. Every time it runs out, it is an hour. Therefore, the monks of the Cathedral of St. Bela keep turning the hourglass every day, and then use the bell that can be heard throughout the King's Landing to tell people what time it is and what they should do. Just like the 3 ancient bells in Norphus, getting up, eating, sleeping, etc. have been calculated, and the people of King's Landing live according to the bells of the cathedral. Therefore, although the long night is now shrouded, and the sun and moon are not seen, King's Landing still has the concept of day and night, and does what it is at what time. The long night has fallen for half a year, and the empire is still stable as a whole. Because the empire has made sufficient preparations, and started to stockpile food and grass early, although the people are not full, and are barely surviving after the food control, at least they will not starve to death in the past 1 or 2 years. The outside world is more cruel. Now most of the shipping links have been cut off. Most merchant ships dare not go out to sea. It is not that the merchants have no courage, but that many city-states have begun to follow the empire's closed policy. In addition to the warships of the coalition, they are constantly running around on the narrow sea. Visser has also learned about the current situation of the outside world through his contact with his Iron Face general. It is said that chaos has broken out in many places. The hungry people rushed into the homes of the rich and opened their granaries. In other places, the riots were suppressed, but cannibalism has begun to appear among the people. Viserys and Bessie can talk across the 2 continents. This is the case for all those who have been eroded by his black fog, just like the wizards of the ancient free fortress claimed by the Shadowbinder of Ashay, Quay Lizard. King's Landing now has 4 glass candles, which were looted from the citadel when the old town was broken. They are 1 green and 3 black. Viserys learned the spell that Quay Lizard taught him to control, but he is still trying to master the glass candles as a whole. If the glass candles of the ancient freehold were really useful, they would be a very powerful magic weapon, just like the Raven Skull, because its call distance is much stronger than Viserys' original state. After all, Viserys and Bessie are now separated by a narrow sea, and the distance is not very far. Sometimes the call will often be disconnected. After the destruction of ancient Valyria, the craftsmanship of making glass candles has also been lost. There are not many glass candles in existence, even rarer than the existing Valyrian steel swords. But the value of a glass candle is far less than that of a Valyrian steel sword, because glass candles have no use for ordinary people, except to detect the return of the magic tide, and naturally they are not as valuable as the Valyrian steel sword that can cut gold, jade and iron like mud. If the glass candles are really useful, Viserys plans to place these 4 candles at the Great Wall, King's Landing, and Essos, and the remaining one is waiting for arrangement. In this way, the message can be transmitted seamlessly and timely, and with a dragon as a mount, the travel time between the 2 places can be shortened. Even if the territory of the empire is doubled, it can still be tightly held in the palm of the hand, and it will not fall apart in the later period because of the large area of the territory. Viserys looked at the black glass candle in front of him, and the flame that never went out, and fell into deep thought. At this time, a pleasant and slightly childish girl's voice came from behind. "Dad, I heard from Mom that you are going to a very far place." Viserys immediately came back to his senses, and then he saw his eldest daughter, Diana, with a silver gold neck-length hair, standing behind him at this moment. Diana is still young, only 6 or 7 years old this year, but she has fully revealed her intelligence, but she likes to play, and is lively by nature. The same is true for Viserys' other child, Heroes Targaryen. Dr. Marwyn, the Grand Maester who is responsible for the education of His Royal Highness, sincerely sighs that Prince Heroes is studious. Children of ordinary families are still at the age of playing when they are 3 or 4 years old. Even the families of great nobles will not start education until the age of 6. However, His Royal Highness Prince Hellas does not like to play. On the contrary, this boy is very interested in books. He is also curious about many things in the world, and has begun to learn to read. Hellas knows more words than his sister. Of course, this is not because Diana's talent is worse, but simply because this sister does not study hard, while Hellas is studying very hard. Well, Dad is going to the East Continent. Viserys heard the voice behind him, turned his head, and saw his eldest daughter, then reached out, and picked up Diana, and the girl sat obediently in her father's arms. "Do you know where the East Continent is? Teacher Marwyn should have taught you." Viserys held his daughter, and tested her knowledge to see if she had studied hard during this period. "Well, of course I know. When Diana heard her father testing her, she immediately twisted and turned in Viserys' arms. Just like all the children in the world, they all like to act like a spoiled child in their father's arms. The eastern continent is the continent of Essos. Diana spoke the name of Essos a little unfluently because of the pronunciation problem. The Targaryen family is the surviving family of the free fortress of ancient Valyria. Now Viserys is determined to rebuild the empire, so the children of the royal family are all educated in bilingual language, that is, Common Language and High Valyrian. In fact, when Viserys was a child in the Red Castle as the second prince, he was educated in Valyrian. The continent of Essos is the common name for the eastern continent among the people, and it is also a simplified version of the name. Some of the letters were lost while calling it. The full name of the continent of Essos should be the continent of Essos. So what is dad going to do in Essos? The girl with short silver hair that reached her neck was trying to bite her words, which made Viserys laugh. He scratched his daughter's nose with his hand, causing her to roll her eyes, and then smiled and said, "To save the world and find the lost Sunday." Chapter 814 Entrustment. The bells of the cathedral rang, and the whole city of King's Landing fell into silence. Except for the Red Castle, which was located at the highest point of the city, all the lights were turned off. In the Imperial Palace, Viserys returned to his bedroom, after letting the two children go back to their bedrooms to sleep. Irian was waiting for him here. The couple reunited after a long separation, and naturally they had sex. After the exercise, the Dawn Princess panted, and threw herself on the soft feather bed on the side, covered with a warm and comfortable velvet quilt, and lay on her side looking at Viserys. "My love. How many women have slept in this bed during my absence in King's Landing?" Irian's hot body exuded temperature in the quilt, and her fingers circled on Viserys' chest. When Viserys heard his great queen ask so directly, he was slightly stunned. He was about to cover up, but Irian raised a finger to block his lips. "Don't lie." Irian hummed twice in the bed. She knew that Viserys was going to lie, just by seeing the fleeting expression on his face. "I've been married to you for 7 years. You just can't change this problem. You blink when you lie." Irian has been married to Viserys for 7 years, but in fact, the two have been together for longer. They officially got married after Irian became pregnant with Diana. Irian still maintained a good figure after giving birth to Diana and later experiencing a miscarriage. She leaned on Viserys' chest and spoke. "I don't care how many women you have, my love, but no matter how many women you have, you can't forget me." Viserys was slightly silent after hearing Irian's words. He didn't even know whether he should nod at this time, but he still hugged the woman who followed him the earliest in his arms tighter. "Will this trip be dangerous?" The couple hugged each other in silence. The candlesticks beside the bed emitted a faint light, and Irian lay in Viserys' arms, and then asked again. "Perhaps. Danger is always there." Viserys took a deep breath and nodded. Danger is naturally unavoidable. After all, he is fighting against an opponent of the Night King's level. Although he has hidden a lot of backup plans, and has never used them over the years, his preparation does not mean that the Night King is not prepared. He heard that the Night King got a dragon from nowhere, so the biggest advantage of the human side was offset, and the existence of this dragon made the human side more passive. According to the information learned at the meeting, Viserys knew some details of the fall of Iban Island. According to some Iban people who escaped from the island by boat, the Night King rode a huge ice dragon, which could spit ice blue flames and cold fog. All people who came into contact with the cold fog would be stripped of their vitality and frozen to death, while the Night King could directly revive these people and turn them into members of the army of the dead. In this way, no matter where the Night King flew on this ice dragon, he could set a fire and the city would fall. Although the human side has 8 dragons, according to the description of these Ibanese, I don't know if there is any exaggeration. This dragon has a body size no less than Valyrian. Therefore, except for Valyrian, the other 5 little dragons, as well as Regal and Viserion, will be in danger when facing the Night King alone. Viserys absolutely dare not let them face the Night King alone. Therefore, Regal and Viserion guarded the Great Wall, and the 5 little dragons guarded High Garden. One is the barrier of the human world, and the other is Viserys' lifeline, which cannot be lost. Then you have to come back alive. In the dimly lit bedroom, the Dawn Princess looked at her husband with a pair of dark eyes. Well, Viserys looked at Orion's beautiful cheek, dragged her hand, and pinched it gently. The woman snorted softly, and Viserys nodded heavily, and then kissed her. The candlelight at the head of the bed swayed gently, and the shadows reflected on the wall blended together again. The next day, the bell of the Great Sept of St. Bela rang 4 times again, and the sound of the bell spread throughout the King's Landing. Orion suddenly woke up from her sleep, feeling a little sore all over, because last night was too intense. Her husband was about to leave, so Orion desperately demanded, and finally exhausted herself, and then she seemed to have a nightmare. My love? However, when Orion woke up and looked up, she did not see the imagined sunshine. The white curtains outside the balcony fluttered slightly, and it was still dark outside. There was no one beside her bed. Viserys had left at some point. Princess Dawn's cheeks suddenly showed a touch of loss. She wanted everything to return to normal, her husband to be by her side, and the sun could rise from the east when she woke up, but all of these were impossible now. Viserys was going to the expedition to the continent of Essos. He had gotten up early and did not disturb Orion's sleep. With the help of the palace maid, he dressed and put on his Valyrian steel armor. His long silver gold hair hung on the cold armor, and his sword dusk hung on his waist. This sword has become famous all over the world with Viserys' battles, and has become a real famous sword. And he has not used it to kill people in person for many years, and he has not put on armor. He kissed Orion on the forehead of the sleeping Orion, then turned and left. Not long after, a long dragon roar sounded in the sky, and at the same time, the bells of the sept rang, and Orion woke up. But there was no one beside her bed, only a Valyrian steel crown quietly placed on the bed, and the ruby in it reflected light slightly. Viserys has left Westeros, and rode his old friend to the distance to save the world. He talked to Orion last night, hoping that she could take the child back to Highgarden, because it would be safer there, but Orion refused. King's Landing is not far from Highgarden. If King's Landing is in trouble, Highgarden will not be safe either. Besides, Viserys went to the east, and Rhaenys and Daenerys guarded the wall. As the capital of the Empire, King's Landing should have a housekeeper. As the Queen of the Empire, Orion did not want to hide far away in Highgarden with her 2 children and cause criticism. She wanted to stay in King's Landing to look after the house for Viserys. Viserys was persuaded by Orion, so he left his crown by the window with a note underneath. The Empire is yours. Orion picked up the heavy Valyrian steel crown, which reflected the metallic luster under the candlelight. Then she slowly put it on her head. Chapter 815. Fuchsing Palace. This world is big and small. Koha is very far away for many Westeros people, but in fact it is just a flight from King's Landing to Winterfell. Viserys flew east on a dragon, and encountered a storm during the journey. The ship that Robb Stark was on was a week earlier than Viserys, and was now floating on the surface of the narrow sea. It was quite scary to be attacked by a storm in the dark. Everyone on the ship was panicked. They didn't expect to be in trouble before they met the White Walkers. However, when the storm was raging, lightning and thunder were roaring, a huge figure appeared in the thunder and dark clouds. Roar, the dragon bathed in the lightning and roared deafeningly. Then the storm dissipated along with the dragon's figure, and the pouring rain disappeared. It was like a nightmare. Everything seemed to have never happened, and even the surging waves gradually subsided. What happened? Everyone on the ship looked confused, including the captain and the first mate. They had been drifting on the sea for so many years, and had never encountered such a situation. How could a storm go away so easily? There was a dragon roar just now. Could it be that your majesty dispelled the storm? An imperial soldier on the ship said uncertainly. There was indeed a dragon roar just now, but your majesty can dispel the storm? The imperial soldiers on the ship all showed horrified expressions on their faces when they heard this. Is that still a human? Isn't that the same as the gods in the sky? It does make sense to say this. When the storm was just intense, many people did see the fleeting figure of a giant dragon in the sky, and everyone heard the deafening dragon roar coming from above, even suppressing the rolling thunder. But saying this is a kind of blasphemy. After all, no matter how strong humans are, how can they be on par with the gods? However, where else in the world can there be giant dragons except the Valyrian Empire? If it was really your majesty who passed by and dispelled the raging storm, wouldn't it be true that he was no different from the gods? The faces of the people on the boat changed. Since this sentence was spoken, everyone fell silent and didn't know what to say next. Fortunately, the storm had just passed, and there were not many torches on the boat, so everyone's faces were unclear. Then they scattered with a call for help, but in fact, everyone who heard this sentence began to have their own thoughts. They began to doubt the gods they had always believed in, and they also became confused about this world. What will happen to the dragons and the White Walkers in this long night? No one knows. Rob, who was also on the boat, did not look like a young master of the north. He was also soaked in the storm just now. Even when the storm was the most intense, he was almost swept into the sea by the wind and waves. Fortunately, a sailor was quick to pull him down, otherwise the young master of Winterfell would have died before he could accomplish his mission. Bang! Rob was pushing a bucket full of water and put it where it should be, then wiped the rain off his face and hair with his hand. There was a lot of salty and bitter taste, which seemed to be the waves just now. Then he looked up at the dark sky. At this moment, the storm and the dragon above his head had disappeared, and he also heard the conversation of the soldiers just now. He followed Viserys as a guard for many years. If there was anyone in the world who knew Viserys best, Rob was definitely one of them. He believed what the man said just now, and it was really possible that the storm was dispersed by his majesty. And he also thought of what his father had said. The world has become different. Rob, you must remember. When the snow falls, and the cold wind blows, the lone wolf dies, and the pack will survive. Rob's beard on his chin and lips has grown out, and the whole person looks much more mature. His breathing is a little heavy, his chest rises and falls, and then he clenched his fists. Viserys flew to Pentos first, and settled in the Nine Towers Palace in his palace. The Nine-Towered Palace was once a palace presented to him by the governors of Pentos. Later, Viserys led 200 people to capture Pentos and used it as a starting point. He eventually led tens of thousands of soldiers to counterattack the Seven Kingdoms and seize the Iron Throne. Therefore, this magnificent palace located by the sea in Pentos also witnessed the revival of the Targaryen dynasty. Later, Viserys ordered it to be renamed the Palace of the Restoration. The royal family of the Valyrian Empire has 5 palaces, namely the Red Castle in the capital of the empire, the High Garden in the Royal Back Garden, the Dragonstone Palace in the Dragon's Rise, the Summer Hall in the Borderland, and the Restoration Palace in Pentos. The palace in Andalus was too small and was hastily built when it was not firmly established. There were many buildings in that palace that were half brick and stone and mixed with wood. It was not even as big as the castles of ordinary nobles in Westeros, so it was later given to Illyrio. However, although there are many palaces for the royal family of the Valyrian Empire, they can fly around very conveniently on dragons, so they don't feel that these palaces are far away. Viserys hadn't been back here for a long time. The Palace of Resurgence was still the same as before, with carved beams and painted pillars, and a white marble dome. Standing on the balcony, you can overlook the entire Bay of Pentos, the white sandy beach, and the gathering of thousands of sails, all of which were busy with the Imperial army preparing for war. The Palace of Resurgence was much larger than the Red Keep. I didn't feel it when I lived there before. When I first moved to the Red Keep, I was too busy with the construction of the Empire to consider it. But this time, when I came back here again, Viserys couldn't help but start to consider whether the Red Keep should be expanded. However, before Viserys could think of a result, an unsullied soldier came in outside the door to report. Your Majesty, the Lord Governor of Pentos wants to see you. Viserys originally purchased 5,000 unsullied soldiers, and these unsullied soldiers were later all used as guards for the royal family. But the Red Keep naturally couldn't accommodate so many unsullied soldiers, so they were scattered in various palaces of the Targaryen family. Although Viserys did not return to Pentos often, the guards of the Renaissance Palace were still the unsullied, and the maids and daily maintenance of the palace were still in place. Otherwise, a palace would have been abandoned if no one had lived in it for a year or two. Let him in. When Viserys heard that his former captain of the King's Guard had rushed over, he nodded slightly. Chapter 2. Wait a minute. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. we cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 816, Fighting Side by Side. Pentus is now the center of the Empire's territory in the East Continent, whether in terms of geographical location, economic strength or political foundation. Although Viserys fled to the Essos continent, he first relied on a piece of gifted land provided by Bravos, and gathered nearby villagers, to build the city of Andalus. But due to the limited urban development foundation, Andalus wanted to surpass the population and economic volume of Pentus. It was simply a pipe dream, and it was impossible to achieve it without dozens or hundreds of years. Therefore, after Viserys captured Pentus, he quickly transferred the center of his power from Andalus to Pentus, and used Pentus as a springboard to finally launch a counterattack against the Seven Kingdoms. Now that Viserys has successfully regained his own Iron Throne, and ruled the entire Westeros, the political center of the Empire has moved to King's Landing, but the economic center is still retained in Pentus. The economic foundation of King's Landing is not as rich as Pentus. Coupled with the superior geographical environment and advantages, Pentus undertakes all trade hubs between King's Landing and even Westeros. Generally, goods that want to be sold to the Seven Kingdoms need to pass through Pentus first, and then be transported to the land of King's Landing and Westeros. The territories of the eastern continent of the Empire, Andalus, and the newly surrendered kingdom of the Three Daughters, Lies, Mia, and Tirosh all need to rely on the economic development of Pentus, and they also rely on Pentus politically. Therefore, Pentus is undoubtedly the central city in the eastern continent and the second most important city in the entire empire. Today, Pentus still retains slavery, and the same is true for Lies, Mia, and Tirosh. Pentus now has 20,000 soldiers who can participate in the war, but of course they will not go all out. Andalus, the kingdom of the Three Daughters, and Pentus have a total of 30,000 troops, joining the 20,000 imperial soldiers who came by boat from King's Landing. A total of 50,000 soldiers set off with supplies to Norvus first, and then rushed to Koha to join more human coalition forces. You go this time too, Bessie. We haven't fought side by side for many years. Viserys stood on a balcony of the Renaissance Palace, looking at the twinkling lights on the sea outside, then turned his head and spoke. Yes, your majesty. On the other side, a knight wrapped in white armor and cloak, wearing a metal mask on his face that slightly reflected the lights in the room, only revealing a pair of eyes, nodded when he heard the words. Bessie Joyce was the captain of Viserys' Kingsguard. He followed Viserys when he first established Andalus. At the beginning, he was the youngest warrior son in an Andal village. He had a 7-pointed star engraved on his forehead. He was skilled in archery and horse riding, had rich combat experience, and could protect his village. Later, the villages were integrated together, and the land of the Bravos coast and the Andal plains was lent by Bravos to the Targaryen prince who had fled from afar. Prince Targaryen used the faith of the seven gods to deceive people, the Andals, the Rhoynar, the title of the king of the first men, and the threat of the soldiers of the Dragonstone fleet. Under these three effects, Viserys integrated all the villages and towns on the Andal plains. Since the fall of the Andal kingdom, the Andals have once again begun to build their own cities. It was at that time that Bessie joined the army of the Targaryen family. Relying on her excellent spearmanship, swordsmanship, and horsemanship, she quickly grew up and made many military exploits. Bessie's character, martial arts, and loyalty are all top choices, so she was eventually spotted by William Derry, the former coach of the Red Castle, and recommended to Viserys as the Kingsguard. He also became Viserys' first Kingsguard and the captain of the Kingsguard. So far, Viserys has only 2 Kingsguards, and the other is a female knight, Maya, a former female mercenary of Volantis. Later, Andalisburg caught fire, and Daenerys was trapped in it with 3 dragon eggs, and Bess's mother was also among them. The loyal captain of the Kingsguard rushed into the sea of fire without hesitation, and was finally seriously injured and survived, but he also lost his ability to fight, and could no longer protect the king's safety. However, the Kingsguard is at a way and lifelong oath. The Kingsguard is responsible for protecting the king's safety. When the king's good is old, sick, or even bedridden or mentally ill, the king cannot theoretically remove him from his position, and must support his king's good for a lifetime. Therefore, at Bess's request, after she struggled down from the brink of death, Viserys gave him the opportunity to lead the troops alone, and began to cultivate the loyal king's good's ability to lead troops as a commander. In the end, Bessie embarked on such a path, and step by step, grew into Viserys' most valued right-hand man, silently guarding the rear for him when Viserys went on an expedition to Westeros and even took back the Iron Throne. Bess's style of commanding troops is completely different from that of Prince Oberyn, another general whom Viserys relies on. Oberyn's style of commanding troops tends to be treacherous and his use of troops is surprising and unpredictable, while Bess's style of commanding troops tends to be calm, which may also be related to his ill-fated fate. Therefore, his greatest ability is not to make mistakes. Therefore, this is why Viserys chose to leave Bessie in his hometown, when he chose to take one of Oberyn and Bessie to Westeros. And Viserys did not bring Bessie here, just to reminisce about the past. He only stayed in Pentos for a short time, and then he would not follow the army of the Empire, but would fly to Koha first. Later, when the army of King's Landing, the Kingdom of the Three Daughters, and the army of Andalus all arrived, Bessie would lead the way to Koha. He also called Bessie here to check his body. At that time, Bessie was seriously injured by the fire and his body could not recover, so Viserys took the risk of injecting the black mist into his body. The black mist certainly has magical power, improving Bess's physical condition, and allowing him to recover to normal or even better than ordinary people, but how many sequelae it has is still unknown. Viserys had seen many monsters in Valyria, who were infected with the black mist and became confused, including Victarion who later became the Deep One. They all have a close relationship with the black mist, so Viserys did not dare to give the black mist to others easily, for fear that they would suddenly become monsters one day. Now only a few people have received the black mist given by Viserys, and most of them are in a last resort. Then Viserys touched Bess's forehead, and in an instant a bone-chilling coldness instantly spread throughout the other's body. Chapter 817 Source. At this moment, Bessie could feel a bone-chilling coldness quickly spreading throughout his body, and the black mist hidden in his body seemed to be stimulated, like a trickling stream, and he was facing a vast ocean. This is. The man with a 7-pointed star on his forehead wearing a metal mask clearly showed a look of shock on his face. He had never seen such a scene before, and it was the first time he saw the huge gap between him and Viserys. After Viserys checked Bess's body, a slightly thoughtful expression appeared on his face. The whole process lasted very short, and it was over in just a moment, but Bess's current physical condition made Viserys a little thoughtful. He gave Bessie a seed, but now this seed has begun to sprout and bear fruit. Bessie can also absorb souls to strengthen herself, but Bess's path to strengthening is different from his. In short, his efficiency is very low, and his growth rate is much slower than Viserys. Viserys asked him, but he didn't know about the nature of the sun and moon. He just grew up slowly, and step by step, but he was also stronger than ordinary humans. For example, he could concentrate more, could go a whole day without eating, and even stopped getting sick. The seed in Bess's body is a seed I planted. I'm his source. Then was the black mist wrapped around me? Was it also given to me by someone when it first came to me? Viserys had a brief conversation with his captain of the King's Guard for a while, and then communicated about the planning and formation of the coalition forces in the near future. After all, Viserys was the commander of the coalition forces, and Bessie was the commander of the Imperial Army. After the discussion, he let Bessie leave first. After Bessie left, Viserys fell into thought for a while. The first time he came into contact with the Black Mist was when he just crossed over to this world. At that time, Viserys was still a second prince in the Red Castle. Because he had learned about the plot in advance, he knew that he was now at the end of the War of the Usurper, and he would be unlucky next. Just when he came to this world, and was in a state of panic, he discovered through a mirror that he could see things that others could not see, but he knew nothing at that time, and did not know what these were. Then when he accidentally killed Kevin Lannister on the way to Dragonstone, and absorbed his soul, everything became different. Viserys found that he could absorb other people's souls to strengthen his own abilities, and at that time he was still in danger. Even though he was afraid, he had no choice but to embark on this road of no return. But now it seems that all this happened by coincidence. Who gave him such a golden finger? At present, according to Viserys' step-by-step exploration, most of its mysterious veils have been revealed, and it is not far from revealing its true face. It can almost be concluded that the black fog must be related to Valyria. The rise and fall of Valyria are closely related to it, and it can also be inferred that this black fog comes from the mysterious underground world. According to the currently known evidence, Dr. Marwyn inferred that Valyria was once a small nomadic people and accidentally discovered the gods from the underground world. Then the ancestors of Valyria prayed to these demons or evil gods to give them power, and this is the magic mastered by the wizards of ancient Valyria, that is, the existence of the black fog. The Valyrian tribe lives near the 14 fire peaks on the peninsula, and under these 14 giant active volcanoes is a road leading to the underground world. The dragons that contributed to the rise of Valyria are mysterious creatures from the underground world. They come from the underground and live near the 14 fire peaks. Because they have the black fog given by the underground demons, the wizards of Valyria have a connection with the dragons, can control the dragons, and become partners with the dragons. Then Valyria began to rise rapidly from a small nomadic people, driving the dragons to fight north and south, expanding to the east, and challenging the Giscari Empire, which was extremely prosperous in the world at that time. The ancient Gis Empire would naturally not succumb to the provocation of a suddenly rising small country, so 5 wars broke out between the newly rising Valyria and the ancient Gis Empire. Valyria's overall strength was at a disadvantage, but they relied on the help of dragons to defeat the powerful Gis army in 5 battles. The Valyrian wizard drove the dragon to sweep across the area where the slave bay is now located. The dragon flame burned Gis and its pyramids into dust and sprinkled salt, sulfur and bones on every inch of its land to prevent any survivors from returning. Valyria's strength advanced by leaps and bounds, laying the foundation for dominating the world in the future. In the end, the Valyrian freehold ruled the world for thousands of years, but suddenly encountered the doomsday scourge at its peak and collapsed overnight. As an expert in the history of Valyria, Dr. Marwyn knew many secrets about the rise and fall of Valyria. He was highly regarded by Viserys, and he was also one of the few people who knew Viserys' secrets. Combining a series of evidence provided by Viserys, he believed that it might be that the transaction between the ancient empire and the underground demons touched the gods in the sky, and even had the ability to challenge the gods. Therefore, the gods in the sky were angry and joined hands to smash the free fortress, sinking it into the sea, and sealed it forever with thick smoke, making it a land rampant with demons. Viserys was born 400 years after the doomsday catastrophe. He didn't know who gave him the black mist in his body in the first place. The unyielding wronged soul of ancient Valyria. The gaze of the underground demon. Or something like the residual soul of Merryx is hiding in the statue. But what is certain is that Viserys in the original trajectory must not have it. If I say what is the difference between Viserys who just crossed over and Viserys in the original trajectory, it may be that my soul comes from another world, or that because I have merged with Viserys of the original trajectory, my soul is inherently much stronger than others. In short, now these black mists are entangled with Viserys, and he has gradually recreated the great empire in history. And naturally, he will inevitably become a thorn in the eyes of something in the future, just like destroying Valyria. After that, Viserys stayed in Pentos for a while. The first batch of Imperial troops that had been drifting on the sea for a long time finally arrived in Pentos, and Viserys also set off to fly to Koha. Chapter 818 Koha. Although Koha sounds far from King's Landing, and for many Westeros people it does feel like it is at the end of the sky. In fact, if you simply compare the straight line distance, it is about the distance from King's Landing to Winterfell. However, the road to Koha is not easy to travel. The forces on the continent of Essos are complex, and there are many unknown lands. These local forces are intertwined and mixed, such as the disputed land of the Kingdom of the Three Daughters. Although the ancient Valyrian Dragon Road runs from Pentos through Norvus to Koha, and has been smooth and unobstructed for thousands of years, this road is rampant with bandits and brotherhoods, especially when passing through the Norvus Mountains, so it is difficult for caravans on the road. However, now that the long night has fallen for more than half a year, the major city-states have begun to block themselves, and the warships of the coalition floating on the sea are all floating on the sea, and no caravanaires to travel on the main road. Because now the outside of the city-state is full of hungry villagers, like a group of demons dancing wildly, fighting for territory and food. The city-state nobles who once ruled these lands have locked themselves in the castle, not caring what the outside has become. Therefore, unless there is a large-scale army marching outside the city, leaving the city without permission is no different from seeking death. Koha is one of the 9 free trade cities in the eastern continent. It is an inland free city-state built along the Kin River, a tributary of the Rhine River, and is located on the edge of the huge Koha forest. Koha is located to the east of Norvis and just north of Volantis. There is a road connecting Koha with the ancient Loina city-state of Anoi. Koha is famous for its craftsmen. Their blacksmiths have mastered a technique to infiltrate color into metal. Even the top blacksmith masters have mastered the technology of recasting Valyrian steel. Master Tob Mortho, who cast the dragon lance and sword for Viserys, once learned the forging craft in Koha. Koha also produces beautifully woven brocades, and the high quality wood produced in the Koha forest is also very popular. The city was founded about 1,000 years ago. It was once ruled by the Governor's Council of Koha, similar to other trading city-states. They believed in the local traditional evil god Black Goat God who loved blood sacrifice. There were also many Red God believers in Koha. Then not long ago, this group of low-level Red God believers in Koha suddenly united, as if they had planned it well, and rehearsed it many times, and suddenly attacked the believers of the Black Goat God in the city, and launched an attack on the Governor's Council of Koha. Since Koha successfully sniped tens of thousands of Dothraki warriors under Kaltimo with 3,000 unsullied under the city 400 years ago, all the guards in the city have been replaced by unsullied, and horsehair has been tied to the spears, which has been passed down to the present. But the Red God believers suddenly launched an attack and successfully seized the rule of Koha, which was actually very dramatic. Because all the soldiers of Koha were unsullied, the Red God believers only attacked and killed the governor holding the harpist baton, and then took away the command of the unsullied. These guards of Koha turned around and became ruthless machines to kill the nobles of Koha. When Viserys came to Koha, half of the people here fell asleep, and the other half were working. After the long night fell, the whole world was looking for ways to save itself, and the policy implemented here in Koha was to take turns to rest. Anyway, there was no concept of day and night now. Valyrian soared over the city and roared, causing the people of Koha below to panic, but the panic was soon calmed down. Viserys rode a dragon down from the sky and landed on a huge square in the center of Koha. Because the lights were bright here, countless red-robed monks in red clothes were holding torches to welcome him. It seemed that they knew in advance that Viserys would arrive today. Boom. A huge black dragon that covered the sky and the sun fell from the sky and then landed heavily on the square in Koha. The ground under the dragon was slightly cracked and its huge wings called for a strong wind and dust, which made many red-robed monks cough, but they did not dare to show any dissatisfaction on their faces. Because on the back of this huge black dragon sat a heroic dragon rider, wearing a shiny Valyrian steel sword, with a scarlet longsword tied around his waist, holding a 2-meter long dragon lance made of pure Valyrian steel, reflecting the cold light under the illumination of countless torches. This is the largest pure Valyrian steel weapon known in the world so far. Because before Viserys, no one wanted to use pure metal to make a powerful weapon like a dragon lance. Spears are usually made of fine wooden poles, and the spearheads are 7 or 8 inches long of metal. Otherwise, heavy weapons are likely to become a burden to generals in battle, and violent collisions of weapons will also crack the tiger's mouth. However, Viserys did not have such concerns, so he could make a pure Valyrian steel weapon. Welcome, His Majesty, the Great Emperor of Valyria. After Viserys descended from the sky on his black dragon, a tall and thin man with prominent facial features, skin as white as milk, and flame tattoos on his cheeks, chin and bald head came out from the group of red-robed monks who had greeted him in advance in the square. He looked at the majestic dragon rider riding on the dragon's back, and then spoke in a loud voice. Who are you? However, Viserys did not intend to get off the dragon's back. His long silver gold hair was draped over his armor, and his pair of lavender eyes looked at the other party, then pressed Rian, who was a little restless under him, and asked in a calm voice, "I'm the supreme priest of the Red God cult, and my common name is Bonero." The supreme priest standing below looked at Viserys, who was looking down from above, but he was not angry because of being despised. He explained his identity. "So you are Bonero." Viserys narrowed his eyes slightly when he heard the other party introduce himself. He had heard of this name. Melisandre once told him to be careful of this person, because although she and the other party both believed in God, they did not follow the same path. In short, they were not from the same faction. Melisandre claimed that the other party would do anything to achieve his goals. And ever since Rian flew to the vicinity of Koha, he began to feel uneasy, and these uneasy emotions were transmitted to Viserys through the connection between the dragon and the dragon rider. But Viserys didn't know why Rian was a little restless. Was it because he was getting closer to the Night King, or because he had met this person? I wish you all a happy new year in advance. Take 2 days off on New Year's Eve and New Year's Day. We have been fighting on 2 fronts for a year. Thank you readers for your continued support. Chapter 819. Outside the city. Koha is located in the central part of Essos, and has the characteristics of a typical temperate continental climate. It is dry, cold and quiet. Viserys settled down in this city temporarily. The Red Monks who now rule Koha provided him with a mansion of the former governor of Koha, and arranged guards, servants and even red priestesses like Melisandre to take care of his daily life. However, Viserys did not care much about this, because although he was born extraordinary, he was not like other nobles who could not live without the service of others. Moreover, the reason why Viserys abandoned his army and flew to Koha in advance was to see for himself what the land in the hinterland of the central part of Essos that was eroded by the White Walkers had become. Therefore, although Viserys arrived here first, he might not live here permanently, but would ride his dragon out every now and then, and would not come back for a short stay at any time, so it was not important for him to have someone to serve him. While Viserys stayed in Koha temporarily, his dragon lived outside the city and foraged freely. The situation outside Koha is not optimistic now. The city-state of Koha radiates from the river Chin to Arnoi, while the radiating area of Volantis reaches the Heartbreak Ridge. A few days before arriving in Koha, Viserys opened the city gate and went out to inspect the forest of Koha and Arnoi under the escort of the unsullied soldiers arranged by the Red Monks. Viserys rode on the horse provided by Koha. With the unsullied soldiers surrounding him, no one dared to approach him. He also saw many miserable scenes along the way. Now the villagers outside Koha have united themselves and formed forces of varying sizes. They have no weapons, relying only on some sticks, stones, sharpened wood as spears, homemade bows and arrows, and kitchen knives at home. Only a few people have weapons, armor and other equipment, just like the wildlings in Westeros. These people may have been mercenaries or swordsmen or knights who were unlucky enough to be locked outside. Now they can undoubtedly fight for a powerful position among these villagers, who are pale and thin, and wandering on the edge of starvation, as their leaders and commanders. The gate of Koha was open for a long time, and a team of more than 200 fully armed unsullied guards came out. They surrounded a young man who obviously had the noble blood of ancient Valyria. He had long, shining silver gold hair and a pair of lavender eyes. He held the reins in his hand and calmly scanned the villagers hiding in the dark around him. These villagers who were about to starve to death were still vigilant when they first saw an army coming out of the city. They hid far away and held their weapons tightly, fearing that the other party would come out to rob food. However, when they saw the young man with silver gold hair in the unsullied army, he had a handsome face and fair and shiny skin. He looked like a pampered young man with a very good life, so their courage gradually grew. In the darkness outside the light of the torches, pairs of eyes were full of greed and covetousness, and some refugees even began to follow them. "Please be kind, sir. We are almost starving to death." However, at this time, a hungry tenant farmer jumped out from nowhere and wailed loudly. He was so hungry that his bones were emaciated, and his eyes were red like a ghost. He rushed in front of the unsullied soldiers and crawled towards Viserys. His voice immediately aroused the inner cries of everyone outside the city of Koha. Every one of them was living a life of hunger, and they wished they could eat the land under their feet. There is limited food outside the city. When the long night just fell, the nobles in the city were smarter and more responsive than the farmers outside the city. They had already used all means to plunder in advance, whether it was money or robbery, to rob the remaining food in the hands of the people, and then close the city gates to keep all refugees out. Therefore, food is now an extremely scarce resource outside the city of Koha, and gold has become less valuable at this time. Now these forces outside the city are fighting and killing each other every day, just to fight for the only little food, and even the forces that have robbed the food will give a small amount of food to their subordinates for long-term development. After all, everyone is selfish, and some people even take the food and run away. In short, the current situation outside the city really tears off the disguise of human civilization, and everything becomes naked. The refugee who suddenly rushed over shouted loudly, inspiring the inner voices of other refugees. They all dragged their hungry bodies. They used to be afraid to face the cold-blooded and ruthless unsullied soldiers, but now the instinct of survival prevailed. When someone shouted, others would naturally follow. "My lord, please be kind. We are almost starving to death. We are almost starving to death." There was chaos outside the city of Koha in an instant, and the sounds of ghosts and wolves howling in the darkness came one after another. The unsullied soldiers who were responsible for protecting Vizira's safety also felt like they were facing a great enemy. They also sensed the danger, and then clenched their spears and round shields in their hands, shouting in Valyrian, "Back off! Back off!" On the city wall, Bonello, the supreme priest of the Red God, stood quietly here, watching the increasingly chaotic situation outside the city, and then spoke. "The crisis is coming. What will he do? Maybe he will give arms to hypocrisy and spread the name of benevolence." A red-robed monk next to Bonello said disdainfully. He felt that he had guessed the thoughts of these kings and nobles. It was just a small favor to win people's hearts. Compared with a true god, this method was undoubtedly a competition between the bright moon and the sun. However, before the red-robed monk could finish his thoughts, a roar of a giant dragon suddenly came from above his head. A mouthful of dragon flame poured down and bombarded the land not far from the unsullied troops. The refugees who surrounded the army below immediately scattered. Although they were very hungry, they still had hope of survival. A mouthful of dragon flame would really kill them. They still weighed the difference. The red-robed monk on the top of the city was choked and did not speak. Thunderbolt method. Bonero looked at the scene outside the city with a thoughtful expression on his face. Chapter 820 Current Situation. After inspecting the situation outside Koha, Viserys took in some scenes. In addition to understanding the corrupt situation of the war in the central hinterland of Essos, the rest was a bit heavy in his heart. Although Viserys had seen countless cruel aspects of the world since his first murder, after escaping from King's Landing, the situation outside Koha was still worrying. He saw civilians with pale faces and skinny bodies because of long-term hunger and cold clothes, but there were also a large number of corpses everywhere on the roadside, some of which had turned into white bones, and there were obvious signs of biting and tearing on them. These corpses were thin and petite, obviously from women or children. It was hard to imagine what happened to these people before they died, and Viserys also saw half of the thigh bones and arms in some people's homes. Although the situation of cannibalism sounds horrifying, it does not seem to be uncommon in this era. People can do anything to survive. Viserys had been staying in King's Landing before. Because the Empire was well prepared, although the people were also hungry, the food distributed by the Empire was only enough to avoid starvation, and they could only eat one meal a day. However, the food stored in the major granaries of the Empire was sufficient and the supply was stable, so there was no such situation at present. Although the people were somewhat dissatisfied, everyone could understand that it was a long night now. However, the stable situation of the Empire was only temporary. If the long night did not dissipate, it would only be a matter of time before it fell into the state of Koha. However, even if the emerging Valyrian Empire collapsed in the long night one day, it would only be slower than the city-states in the East Continent. Viserys felt heavy in his heart, and then turned his horse's head back to Koha, while the dying people lying on the ground by the roadside were looking at the last light with empty eyes. They were sick people, and they were not even qualified to be eaten. There must be a great epidemic after a great disaster. This is especially true when people start to eat each other. These people may have eaten their own kind, so as a punishment, they will suffer double torture before they die. One is hunger and the other is disease. But the good thing is that they don't even have the qualifications to be eaten. Everyone avoids them and stays away, even those who are already hungry, and these people can only lie on the ground and look at the sky quietly and wait to die. Compared with the upcoming war, the situation outside is just insignificant. Viserys returned to the city of Koha, and the supreme priest of the Red God came to chat with Viserys. The ancient alien gods have gathered enough power to swallow up the entire world. The cold wind has already blown, and there is a long night that never ends. When Viserys heard the words of the red-robed monk, his eyes were still looking outside the city, and then he retracted his gaze and looked at the other party. So the high priest believes that these are necessary sacrifices for humans to defeat the White Walkers? Bonero was slightly silent after hearing Viserys' words. He didn't know how to respond. The Red God cult is well known for its universality and is widely spread among the slaves and common people at the bottom. It preaches that believing in R'hllor can survive the future doomsday. However, there are not a few Red God cult believers outside the city of Koha now. Even when Viserys just went out for a stroll, he could see that there are still many people who have not given up hope in God. Although they are almost starving to death, they are still praying devoutly. It's a pity that the God they believe in did not respond to them. If the White Walkers appear outside the city of Koha, these people will become our enemies. Viserys somewhat understood why the war situation in the East Continent had deteriorated to this point, because they were all fighting on their own, and no unified strategy was formed before the meeting representing all mankind to resist the White Walkers was held. The last time Westeros faced the invasion of the White Walkers was during the reign of King Robert. Although King Robert's ability to govern the country was limited, he still organized the largest migration in human history, the Great Exodus from the north. They drove all the northerners south of the neck, and only the soldiers of the Seven Kingdoms resisted on the front line. This greatly hindered the speed of the White Walkers replenishing the army of the dead, and also reduced the pressure of the coalition soldiers to resist, and even laid the foundation for the subsequent GD counterattack of the human coalition in the Battle of the Green Fork. Otherwise, if the White Walkers swept across the north, the vast army of the dead would sweep across Westeros and even the whole world unstoppably, just like a snowball rolling bigger and bigger, until it was difficult to deal with. Now Viserys has come to Koha in person. It is still a long way from the main battlefield between humans and the White Walkers, but the situation here is already very grim, especially since these people don't know how to resist the White Walkers at all. He dared not imagine what the kingdoms of Ivervalon, Oberyn and Salah have become in the main battlefield now. How many dead legions are there now? 100,000? 200,000? Or millions? As the supreme priest, Bonero is definitely good at deceiving believers. He also has some magic skills, and is considered a powerful wizard, but as a ruler, a king, and a commander, he is obviously still incompetent. He was slightly stunned when he heard Viserys' words. He didn't react at first, but then he understood. His face was slightly ugly, and he turned his head to look outside the city. Then Bonero said goodbye to Viserys, and then hurriedly left here, and conveyed orders to his red-robed monks. Soon after, the gates of Koha were opened, and the unsullied soldiers rushed out, driving away the refugees outside Koha, and driving them away from the east. And then a ballad spread among the refugees, that is, the long night only falls here, as long as you keep going south, it is warm and sunny there. Viserys asked Bonero to drive away the refugees outside Koha, but it was not that he would not give them a way to live. But when the scourge comes, this is one of the necessary measures, just as he said, necessary sacrifice. He is not mocking Bonero's hypocrisy, but saying this seriously. If these people are not driven away, when the White Walkers reach Koha, they will still die, and will fight for the Night King, which is unacceptable to the coalition that wants to defeat the Night King. And even if they are not driven away, they may not be able to live for long. It is death to be surrounded outside the city of Koha. It is better to go somewhere else and maybe there is a way to survive. Happy New Year. Chapter 821 Frontline. Viserys settled in Koha for a short time. On the other side, the kingdom of Ivervalon. This is a mysterious country located in the dense forests in the north of Essos. The mysterious race living here is called Ivovalan, which means forest walker in Dothraki. The biting cold wind enveloped the black forest adjacent to the Fang Bay. The white snow was so thick that the road ahead could not be seen clearly. Every step forward would sink the ankles deeply into the wind and snow. Rustle. However, in this snowstorm, several short wooden men wearing leaf clothes supported each other and were moving forward with difficulty. Some of them were injured and were bitten crazily by those terrible monsters, but they finally fought their way out and escaped. However, those monsters did not let them go and were still chasing them hard behind them, and the wooden men did not give up their companions. Even though the injured companion's face was pale and shaky like a candle in the wind, they still supported each other and kept moving forward. At this time, they heard dense footsteps and roars from behind. Hearing these sounds, the fleeing forest walkers trembled slightly, especially the seriously injured Ivovaran, who spoke in despair. "We are dead. Don't worry about me, you run first." He resolutely let go of his hands, wanting to let his two companions go first and stay behind to cover them. "Brother." The remaining two wooden men also showed despair on their faces. The three brothers and sisters supported each other and had escaped hundreds of miles, but they did not expect that they still could not escape the attack of these blue-eyed pale monsters. "We are here to accompany you." The remaining two Ivovaran people were a man and a woman. The three brothers and sisters were the injured brother, the second sister, and the youngest brother. Ivovaran people have short statures and scales like bark on their bodies. They are somewhat similar to the children of the forest, but not exactly the same. They are like distant relatives. They do not have the long lifespan of the children of the forest, but they have a far greater reproductive capacity than the children of the forest. Both of them have the ability to master magic. The eldest brother decided to stay behind to cover the retreat. The remaining two siblings did not want to escape and wanted to stay and die with him. The injured Ivovaran, who was a few years older, began to change his face and wanted to scold his brothers and sisters to run away quickly, but then he changed his mind and let it go. They have been running for so long with the help of the forest mother, but they still can't get rid of these blue-eyed demons. Now they are about to escape from the forest, and it is even more impossible to get rid of them. Their brothers and sisters will die early or late, and the end will be the same. The wood people relied on the forest and magic to deal with the white walkers for several months. They were unwilling to give up their hometown. However, when they turned their eyes to the outside world, they found that the situation was even more chaotic. The human kingdoms surrounding the forest have all fallen. They are the last hope in the area, occupied by the White Walkers, and they have been waiting for no reinforcement. Therefore, King Ivovalan, who insisted on resisting, and the leader of the Woodmen, decided to abandon their homeland and lead their people to break out. But they did not expect that their breakout was ambushed by the White Walkers. This group of things that could not wait to pounce on them as soon as they smelled the smell had surrounded the last home of the Ivovalan people without knowing when. So thousands of woodmen were killed and fell apart, and most of the tribesmen were drowned in the ocean of blue-eyed demons. It was under such circumstances that the three brothers and sisters managed to kill their way out and escape. In the darkness, there were noisy footsteps and terrifying roars. They could not see clearly how many dead people were rushing towards them. They could only hear the footsteps getting closer and closer, and the countdown of death kept ringing. The Ivovaran kingdoms have perished. Let's die together. The three last Ivovaran people clenched the wooden sculptures in their hands and were ready to fight to the death. However, at this moment, the rumbling sound of iron hooves suddenly came from the distance. Boom boom boom. The earth was shaking slightly, and the thick snow on the ground couldn't help but jump up, and along with the rumbling sound of iron hooves, there was a sharp and high roar. Roar roar roar. The three brothers and sisters who were curled up in a ball hugging each other and preparing to die calmly heard this sudden sound and opened their eyes instantly. What is this sound? A few days after the long night fell, Iban Island was the first to be attacked, and the Ivovaran kingdom, not far from Iban, was the first to know the news, so they sent envoys to the human kingdom and many city-states to lobby for help a long time ago, hoping to find reinforcement. However, there was no news for several months after the messenger left. Under the cover of the long night, population movement was frozen, and information transmission became extremely difficult. Therefore, the wood people trapped in the forest knew nothing about the outside world, and they didn't even know that humans from the Valyrian Empire, many kingdoms, city-states, and tribes had formed the highest level of alliance to jointly resist the invasion of the White Walkers. Then the three brothers and sisters just opened their eyes, and before they could see clearly in the darkness which side the reinforcement were coming, they heard the rumbling sound of horse hooves getting closer and closer, and the light of torches in the distance illuminated the entire sky. Woo woo woo. The Dothraki cavalry held the Arak scimitar in their hands, and the constant howling in their mouths was like a raging fire that instantly invaded the entire field. The galloping hooves stomped heavily on the ground, and the mud and snowflakes flew up. The knights raised their scimitars high, and then fell fiercely. Puff puff puff. They quickly dismembered the blue-eyed demons into debris all over the ground, and then burned them all to death with torches in the howling. The Dothraki cavalry arrived so quickly that the three wooden brothers and sisters were stunned and did not react, and then the battle was over. There were not many whites chasing them, and the number of Dothraki cavalry far exceeded these whites. In addition, the Long Night had fallen for half a year, and the Grassland Knights at the forefront had already figured out the weaknesses of the whites in the battle, so the battle became unusually smooth, and the slashing and burning were done in one go. Who are you? The three wooden brothers and sisters huddled together and looked at the cavalrymen who surrounded them in horror. The leader was a horse king with a naked upper body, revealing his twisted muscles, long braids, and a mask on his face. His eyes were a little scarlet, and he sat on the horse's back and looked quietly at the three wooden brothers and sisters below. Then he suddenly stretched out his hand. Chapter 822 Karth. The Dothraki people who lived at the foot of the Holy Mother Mountain suddenly appeared in the north of the Great Grass Sea, at the junction of the Kingdom of Ivervalon and the Kingdom of Obba. Although the Dothraki people were not a law-abiding race, they were afraid of the magic of the Wood People, so the Dothraki tribes would try to avoid the dense forest where the Wood People lived in the north. However, no one expected that the Dothraki tribe would suddenly appear here this time. The Dothraki used to be active as a tribe, but since the sudden appearance of Mengokal unified all the tribes, the Dothraki people today are not so much a large tribe as a Dothraki kingdom. Mengokal, the horse king who unified all the tribes, is the king of this kingdom. The living habits and rules of this nomadic country are actually changing subtly under the rule of Mengokal. For example, now that the Dothraki people are unified, there will be no more infighting. For example, they are now beginning to learn production and life, building their own houses, and wearing thick clothes, because this is the way to deal with the coming of the Long Night. Otherwise the fittest will survive, and those who are unwilling to change will be frozen to death. However, Mengokal himself is an exception. As the strongest warrior in the entire Dothraki kingdom, he does not seem to be afraid of the cold. He does not need to eat, and the Long Night cannot defeat him. Therefore, he has become the pride and faith of many prairie knights. At this time, Mengokal led his prairie kingdom and suddenly appeared in the north of the Great Grass Sea in the west of the Holy Mother Mountain, which was beyond the expectations of many people, and even the White Walkers did not expect it. The prairie knights under Mengokal defeated the pursuers of the dead army, and saved the lives of many Ivoviran people. The prairie knights who have always killed people without blinking an eye now seem to have suddenly become much more kind. They no longer kill people, set fires and plunder money and food, but start to save people, which many people did not expect. Then Mengokal's tribe carried these rescued people, continued to gather the remnants of the Kingdom of Orba and the Kingdom of Selar along the way, and continued to move westward. The Dothraki cavalry descended from the sky on the shore of the Fang Bay, defeated the pursuit of some of the dead army, won some small-scale battles, and boosted the morale of the human coalition. On the other side, Zuaing, an envoy from the Golden Dynasty, crossed the Jade Sea on a ship and finally arrived in Karth. Karth is an extremely large and wealthy city in the southeast of the Central Essos continent. It is the city of wizards and wealthy merchants. The people of Karth claim to be located at the center of the world, a gateway connecting the north and the south, and a bridge connecting the east and the west. Therefore, as an envoy of the Golden Dynasty to the Valyrian Empire, Zuaing followed the delegation to Karth by ship, which means that he officially came from the eastern world to the western world. Because this is the dividing line between the eastern and western worlds, The middle-aged man with black hair and brown eyes wore the traditional costumes of the Golden Dynasty. When he got off the boat, he was also looking at this magnificent city. The walls of Karth are tall and heavy, with 3 layers. They are a wonder of the world and a symbol of the city's power. The outer wall is made of red sandstone, 30 feet high, and the middle wall is made of grey granite, 40 feet high, with lifelike battle scenes carved on it. The inner wall is made of black marble, 50 feet high, and covered with erotic carvings. While Zhuang was looking at the city was also looking at him. As an envoy of the Golden Dynasty, his presence could not be ignored. Welcome to the greatest city in the world. When Zhuang got off the ship and stood at the port to look at this prosperous and rich city, a cold and sharp voice suddenly sounded in his ears. The middle-aged man was startled, and then subconsciously put his hand on the hilt of the sword at his waist, and then he saw a man with pale and shriveled skin, blue lips, and deep eye sockets staring at him with a faint gaze. Point it is also a city ruled by the Immortal Temple. Then the other party spoke again and added. Although Zhuang was startled, he could tell from the words of the other party and the servants standing behind him that the other party was the one who came to greet him, because the other party spoke the Yi language word by word. Therefore, the envoy of the Celestial Empire calmed down a little, then put his hand down from the hilt of the sword, looked at the other party curiously, and couldn't help asking, "Do you know our language?" The man sent by Karth to welcome the Golden Celestial Empire envoy just smiled softly, and his pale face looked a little scary under the light of the torch. For the immortals, there is nothing in this world that can be called a secret. When Zhuang heard the other party mention the name of an immortal again, he thought of the fact that the other party claimed that the force that now ruled the city was called the Immortal Temple. This was different from the information he had learned about Karth in advance. As an envoy, although Zhuang was not very professional, he represented his country, so he was like 100,000 wise, and couldn't help asking again. Immortals, Immortal Temple, the names sound very similar. What are they? This is Karth. But as far as I know, the royal family is the one who nominally rules Karth. And there are also the 13 giants, the ancient guild of spice, and the tourmaline brotherhood. The person in front of him had pale skin and blue lips. Zhuang knew that the other party was a wizard. There were also traces of wizards walking in Yiti, but he had never heard of the names of Immortals and Immortal Temple. Because the Golden Celestial Empire has been powerful and proud since ancient times, they are completely immersed in their own world and have not looked at the whole world. They know very little about the outside world and just passively accept some information from the outside world. Anyway, the countries outside are not as powerful as themselves. Zhuang has a straightforward personality and can't hold back the questions in his heart. Instead of going around in circles, it is better to ask the other party openly. Fortunately, the other party can use the language of Yiti and may have walked in the territory of the Celestial Empire, so there is no obstacle for the two to communicate. Although the Golden Kingdom is not far from Karth, what we know about this neighbor is that the royal family nominally rules Karth, but the power is controlled by the 13 giants, the ancient guild of spice, and the tourmaline brotherhood. Zhuang had never heard of the name of this immortal temple. That's a thing of the past. The wizard was not angry when he heard Zhuang's question, but just smiled and spoke, but his smile was a little creepy. The eternal darkness has come, the glass candles are lit, and the ghost grass begins to grow again. Now is the era of wizards ruling Karth, and the immortals are the kings here. I'm here because the immortals invite you to visit the temple. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 823, Palace of Immortality. The wizard who claimed to be named Baiya purely invited the envoys of the Golden Dynasty to the Immortal Temple, the current power center of Karth, which can also be called the Immortal Temple or the Temple of Dust. As Zhuang learned from the delegation, the nominal rulers of Karth are the royal family here, descendants of the ancient king and queen of Karth, who live in a palace called the Thousand Temples. However, similar to many city-states, The power of the royal family of Karth was consumed in internal strife, and merchants with a lot of wealth took advantage of the situation and took control of the power of Karth. They were called the 13 Giants, the ancient guild of spice and the Tourmaline Brotherhood, and they also fought each other. Strictly speaking, no one was the real ruler of Karth, and this was an oligarchic city-state. But all this changed when the tide of magic revival became stronger and stronger. The wizard's power was recovering rapidly, and all those who had humiliated the wizards were now cursed. Then, when the long night suddenly fell, and the whole world fell into darkness, the wizard completely ruled the city-state. The royal family of Karth, the 13 Giants, the ancient guild of spice, etc. did not dare to disobey the wizard's will. No one dared to ignore what they said, and they were even despised as skeletons plus lies. The royal family of Karth all bowed their heads and accepted their fate. As an outsider, Zuang naturally knew the truth, that a strong dragon cannot suppress a local snake. Although he was an envoy of the Golden Dynasty, he was in a foreign country and now the long night was shrouded. Even if he died here, no one would avenge him. Therefore, when he faced the invitation of Bayapuli, although he thought rationally that this immortal palace should not be a good place, he did not dare to refuse directly, so he could only bite the bullet and go there, deciding to adapt to the situation. Zuang accepted the invitation of the wizard Bayapuli, and then they and the group passed through the port of Karth and entered the city. The city is very prosperous, with countless slender spires standing tall, and many large and small squares. Although the whole world is now plunged into darkness, the prosperous city of Karth is like a city that never sleeps, and lights are still on everywhere. Every square has exquisite fountains in the shape of griffins, dragons, and sphinxes. The people of Karth are still living their lives step by step, without any panic of the long night, and there is no miserable scene like the fallen or many unfallen cities in the central part of Vessus continent, as if there is no natural disaster or man-made disaster. Because the wizard promised them that no matter what happened in this world, the immortals would protect the city. The long night is just a stage of the largest scale magic tide affecting the world. Across the entire city is a huge arcade street, and the ancient heroes of this city stand on white and green marble columns, 3 times the size of real people. Zuang and his companions first passed through a bronze archway carved in the shape of 2 snakes in love, whose scales were exquisite jade, obsidian and lapis lazuli, and then came to the ruins of an ancient building that was completely grey. It was long and low, without towers or windows, like a huge stone snake coiled in a forest of black bark trees with dark blue leaves. The black tiles covered the roof of the hall, many of which had fallen or broken, and the plaster between the stones was mostly dry and broken. This is the Golden Dynasty's envoys were not just Zuang, but the envoys sent by Emperor Buhei also included many officials who had little power in the Yadu, but the backbone came from the scout captain of the 5 fortresses garrison, and the other party was also invited by the wizards. Everyone looked at each other, and then their eyes fell on Zuang, and Zuang was also under a lot of pressure, but Hayayapuli seemed to see his doubts and nodded seriously. This is the Immortal Palace. But those who come to the Immortal Palace to seek an audience with the Immortals must abide by a rule. The pale face of Hayayapuli was faintly visible in the firelight, with a standard smile on his face, but this smile made the other party even more uneasy. That is to drink this cup of night shadow water, because only in this way can you feel the truth and wisdom presented in front of you. Hayayapuli did not wait for Zuang to ask about the rules of entering the Immortal Palace, nor did he wait for the other party to ask if he could not go in, but spoke directly. Because he was the person the Immortals specifically asked to see, the Immortals told him a few days ago that a fleet from the east was about to arrive in Karth, and the Immortals asked Hayayapuli to bring the person in charge on the ship. Hayayapuli turned around and took a cup of thick blue drink from the servant behind him. It was said that it was made of leaves from the black forest next to the Immortal Palace, and then handed it over. The envoy of the Golden Dynasty took the cup of dark blue thick drink, and his expression was a little strange. Because blue food would make people feel uncomfortable psychologically anyway, and the night shadow water was dark blue, as viscous as honey when flowing, and its smell was disgusting, like the smell of ink and rotten meat. But Zuang had no better way. He took the cup of night shadow water and the wizard Hayayapuli and his servants looked at him with sharp eyes. It seemed that he had no way to refuse, let alone escape, so he could only bite the bullet and drink it, and pray that this disgusting night shadow water was not poisonous. Forget it. Gulp, gulp, gulp. The envoy from ED mustered up the courage to raise his head and drink the cup of night shadow water. However, the taste of the drink was not what he imagined. After swallowing the night shadow water, its aftertaste is like the superposition of all the flavors that the drinker has tasted, and more than that, its taste seems to change with every swallow, sometimes bitter, sometimes sour, and sometimes sweet. Zhuang drank the cup of night shadow water, and the pale wizard Heiapuli and the servants behind him showed satisfied smiles on their faces. Very good, you can enter the Immortal Palace. But you must be alone. The rule for visiting the Immortal Palace is to drink the night shadow water, and the visitor must enter alone. The front door can be entered but not left. There are 4 doors when entering the palace, the first door and the other 3. To find the immortals, visitors must always go up and always go to the right door. The doors in the palace are sometimes open, and there are all kinds of strange scenes in the house, which may exist in the past, have not yet come, or even will not happen. Some are beautiful, some are terrible, some are surprising, and some are terrifying. Before you reach the immortals room, you must not enter any other room, except the one on the far right. To come out, you must follow the same rules. The wizard's tone became stern when he mentioned these rules, because these are the taboos of the Immortal Palace, otherwise no one knows what will happen. Chapter 824 4 Doors. After listening to the instructions of the wizard Heiapuli, the scout captain from the east silently took note of it in his heart, and then nodded slightly, to show that he understood it. In that case, please enter the Immortal Palace. Heiapuli and his servants returned to their previous kindness, with a cold smile on their faces. Then they opened the door of the dilapidated ancient building, and allowed Zhuang to enter alone. The rest of the Golden Dynasty delegation members were blocked outside the Immortal Palace. In that case, let's meet this so-called immortal. See what he wants to see me for. The middle-aged man with a red tasseled helmet on his head, wearing the armor of a 5 base officer, with a resolute face, and a thick black beard on his chin said silently in his heart. Then he calmed his mind slightly, grasped the hilt of the sword at his waist, and pushed the door and walked in. Creaking, the heavy door of the Immortal Palace was pushed open with an obscure sound, and even some dust fell from the top of the head. Then the door closed with a loud bang, and the scout captain from the Golden Dynasty disappeared without a trace. Where is this? Zhuang walked into the Immortal Palace, but before he could see the surrounding environment clearly, the door behind him closed with a bang, isolating it from the outside world. Although it was just a shabby wooden door, for some reason Zhuang vaguely felt that it was like a world isolated. He could no longer feel the outside world. The faint whispers just now, the wizard's gaze, etc. were all isolated at the moment the door of the Immortal Palace closed. As a scout captain of the 5th Fortress Garrison, the middle-aged man was highly skilled in martial arts and agile. His reaction speed was very fast. When the door just closed, his hand was on the door handle. He felt a little uneasy in his heart, but now he could get out by just opening the door. But he kept his hand on the door knob for a long time, but he still didn't open the door, because he thought of what the wizard named Heiapuli told him before entering the Immortal Palace. You can enter through the front door, but you can't leave. No matter what you see in front of you, there are several doors. Always open the door on the far right. Zhuang thought of what Heiapuli told him, that you can only enter through the front door but not leave, and violating the rules of the Immortal Palace is likely to cause extremely terrifying things. Therefore, he was silent for a long time, and finally loosened his hand holding the door knob. He did not risk opening the door to escape, but turned around, and began to look carefully at the interior of the Immortal Palace. Now that the long night has fallen, the outside world is pitch black, and the Immortal Palace has no windows from the outside, so it is naturally dark inside. Zhuang didn't know what this place looked like on weekdays, but now there was a blazing torch next to the front door of the Immortal Palace. It seemed that it was for his own use. Otherwise, it would be pitch black here, and he couldn't see anything, so he couldn't find the door. The door on the far right. The middle-aged man took a deep breath, then took the burning torch off the wall, and held it tightly in his hand. The light of the torch dispelled the darkness, and the world in front of him suddenly became much brighter. He also really saw the appearance of the entrance of this hall. The rooms here were the same architectural style as the outside, all of which were dilapidated and ancient decorations. Now there were 4 shabby wooden doors in front of Zhuang, 2 of which had been opened, the 2 in the middle of the 4 doors, and many faint sounds came from them, attracting Zhuang to walk over here. What's inside the door? Is there someone in here? Zhuang's face was slightly tense, and he held the hilt of the sword in his hand, because there seemed to be some women's moans coming from the second door on the left. However, when he walked to the second door and looked inside, the scout captain's face suddenly turned red, because the scene presented in the second door was simply unbearable to watch. A beautiful woman with a charming figure was lying naked on the ground with her limbs spread out, and at the same time, 5 ugly dwarfs were lying on her and humiliating her. Asshole. Zhuang's face turned red, and he was furious when he saw these unbearable scenes, because it was obvious that no matter whether the woman was willing or not, this was a very immoral thing, and if it was not willing, he would kill these guys. Zhuang held the hilt of the sword at his waist, and anger rushed to his brain. He took a step forward, and then he felt cold all over, standing there and not daring to move a step. It was not that he took a step forward, but that the live spring palace was still being played in the second door, and the 5 dwarfs were humiliating the beautiful woman with a charming figure. It was that before Zhuang took the next step and directly stepped into the second door, he suddenly thought of the wizard Hayapula's instructions to him. Remember, always open the door on the far right. The pale-faced, blue-lipped wizard had repeatedly warned Zhuang not to open the wrong door in front of the immortal palace, otherwise he might not see the immortals, but would release a terrible disaster. But the door in front of Zhuang was the second door on the left, and it was obviously not the rightmost door that Hayapula had told him to open. If Zhuang had really stepped in just now, no one would know what would happen. Many people have disappeared in the immortal palace over the years. Therefore, he suddenly stopped in place before taking a step forward, and cold sweat slid down his forehead. Hayapula said that the rooms in the immortal palace would sometimes open automatically, and there would be all kinds of strange scenes and prophecies in the room. Some exist in the past, some have not yet come, and some will never happen, but the world has deviated from its previous trajectory. Zhuang stood in front of the second door and looked at the live spring palace still being performed in the room, then felt a chill in his heart and involuntarily took 2 steps back. He was in no mood to read these things at the moment. His mind was full of what Hayapula had just told him, and then he fell into thought. If it is a prophecy, what does this scene in front of us mean? In the past, or in the future, a beautiful woman was raped by 5 dwarfs. But what kind of big deal is this? What kind of prophecy is this? Zhuang was confused, not knowing why such a prophecy appeared in the immortal palace. But he still did not forget his business. Then he cast his eyes on the 4th door, which was the rightmost door that Hayapula had always told him to open, and then walked towards this door. However, when he passed by the 3rd door that he had also opened, he looked inside for some reason. However, there was only white snow inside, and nothing could be seen outside the door. Therefore, Zhuang did not dare to stay, and directly opened the rightmost door and walked in. Chapter 825 Illusion. Zhuang opened the door on the far right and walked in, but the scene in front of him made him stand there in a daze, not daring to move. Because after he walked into this door, he found himself in a completely unfamiliar world. Is this the room behind the door? Impossible, it's too big. Zhuang pushed open the door on the far right and walked into it, only to find that he seemed to have walked into a magnificent palace. This is a palace with a completely different architectural style from the Golden Celestial Dynasty. The ground is paved with huge golden square tiles, and several towering stone pillars support the dome. His eyes looked up along the main road in the middle, and at the end of the steps was a hideous metal throne. When Zhuang saw this metal throne, his breathing even stopped slightly, because he could imagine at a glance how many great emperors in ancient and modern times had sat on it to command the world, and thousands of troops were rolling. However, at this moment, this magnificent and domineering throne was empty, with only a crown quietly placed on it. A huge ruby was inlaid in the crown, absorbing the surrounding light and emitting dazzling light. Zhuang pushed open the fourth door and walked into the palace. Before he could react, the door behind him closed by itself. He heard the sound and turned around, but found that there was nothing behind him, only a cold wall, and a relief of a giant beast on the wall was looking down at him with cold eyes. He was startled again, and then he realized that the other party was just a relief, not a real monster. What kind of monster is this? After being startled, Zhuang calmed down and looked at the relief carefully. After all, this is the Immortal Palace. In addition, the wizard's warning before entering made Zhuang alert and concentrate, so he was often scared. And the relief in front of him can be seen as a big guy with a hideous head and a huge body and a pair of huge wings. It may be the totem of this country. Zhuang looked up and down. He had seen many monsters in the Grey Wasteland and even hunted them, but he had never seen a monster like this and didn't know its name, so he inferred that it might be the totem of the owner of this palace. Now this gorgeous palace is empty except for Zhuang, but the reason for the emptiness is very simple, because it is very likely that there is a war here. Zhuang walked into the center of the palace and looked up to see a big hole in the dome of the palace, revealing the clear sky outside. The bright sunshine penetrated the hole and sprinkled into the palace, and the broken hole was burning with raging flames, and even from time to time there was dust mixed with bricks and stones falling down and hitting the gorgeous golden tiles on the ground. There is a war here. Although Zhuang knew that the picture in front of him was probably just an illusion, because the size of this palace alone exceeded the size of the Immortal Palace he saw from the outside, so this could not be a palace in the Immortal Palace. It should be just an illusion. Just like the scene of a woman and 5 dwarfs he saw before, the past, future, or scenes that will never happen. This is one of them. Because Zhuang didn't know where this was, he had no way to infer whether this was a story that had happened in the past, or would happen in the future, or was supposed to happen, but would never happen, because of the change in the trajectory of the world. But he hoped that this would happen in the future, because he could see the clear sky and bright sunshine outside through the big hole in the palace. This means that humans have finally defeated the long night. Humans used to not cherish the sun above their heads, but they missed it very much until they lost it, including Zhuang. The war outside was rumbling, and shouts of killing were heard everywhere. Then the middle-aged man with a red cherry helmet and chainmail turned his eyes to the hideous metal throne above the center of the palace, and then walked in this direction. Tap tap. Zhuang climbed the steps of the throne room and walked towards the direction of the Iron Throne step by step. The crown, which was slightly reflecting light, lay quietly on the throne. Zhuang's eyes were all on the crown. The ruby in the crown was reflecting light, and it seemed to be looking at him as well. Then the middle-aged man came to the Iron Throne. He looked at the crown, and suddenly felt a strange movement in his heart. It was as if there was a voice in his mind urging him to reach out and pick up the crown and put it on his head. Zhuang also stretched out his hand for some reason. The ruby in the crown was still shining slightly, but just when his hand was about to touch the crown, it suddenly stopped. Damn it. Then the middle-aged man clenched his outstretched hand into a fist, suddenly retracted it, and then gasped heavily. It is not easy to resist the desire in your heart, but fortunately Zhuang has his own perseverance in his heart. This is the spiritual power left by the ancestors of the Golden Dynasty. Although it is just some poems and scriptures, it supports Zhuang's will at this last moment and allows him to break free from the trap of desire. This is a trap. After Zhuang overcame his inner desire, his gaze towards the crown suddenly changed, becoming somewhat terrified. Even though the ruby was still quietly shining, he still stepped back a few steps and stayed away from the other party. He didn't know what would happen if he had just picked up the crown, but his inner reason and instinct told him that it might not be a good result. However, at this moment, the sound of a girl playing suddenly came from not far away, instantly attracting Zhuang's attention. The girl's playful voice was not loud, but it overwhelmed the sound of fighting outside, and it was obvious that there was a war outside the palace now, and even the owner of this palace disappeared, so there would definitely be no girl playing here. Sure enough, Zhuang looked over and found that there were 4 large doors on the side not far below the Iron Throne, quietly waiting for him. Similarly, 2 of the 4 doors were already open, but this time Zhuang learned from the previous lesson. This time he didn't even dare to look at it again, for fear of being attracted by it like the crown. Instead, he walked directly to the door on the far right, opened it and walked in. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.